Hello, everybody. Hey there, everybody. So, that is a very late 67 AB165 that has been converted to having the AA864 output section, so the noise level drops. Now, the amp's not done. It's still got some background stuff happening, a lot of it having to do with the old cables on the grid connections, the unshielded cables, wires that they used. That's going to get replaced with shielded, and that remaining noise should drop. The other issue with the AB165, it has some very critical runs made beneath the board, and if that cloth-covered wire absorbs yuck over the years, you can get cross-talk from other stuff in this section. So the amp is not done, but it sounds a lot better than it used to, because it used to just go. So all the reverb was coming from a plug-in on the mic, added after the mic. So no reverb added to the AB165. So enough about that. Let's get to everyone's comments and stuff. Matt Johnson's got a big pot of chicken stock simmering away. All right. Dustin, you will be missed. John Rams got the first question here. He's got a 64 Deluxe reverb where even with both volumes at minimum, a faint distorted signal can be heard if the input is loud enough, digging in hard on a telly with humbuckers. Either input, swap V1 and V2 for new tubes, no change. Well, there can be a lot of things happening with this. You could have crosstalk in the wiring, though that's not that typical on a Deluxe reverb. You could have a bad bypass capacitor on V1B/V2B because those share a cathode. And so you're mixing them together. And if that bypass cap isn't really good, you will get crosstalk. The bypass cap, among other things, eliminates talk from the two different triodes. But the other issue is you could have Russian tubes. And it's not all Russian tubes, but a lot of tongue saws, a lot of Sovtecs, for whatever reason, in a Deluxe reverb or other similar AB763 circuit, you will get that kind of crosstalk. And so you can try a JJ or some other brand of tube, Chinese or Slovakian, and that may be the issue. Without having your amp in front of me, I can't tell you more than that, but I don't know what you swap V1 and V2 for. So you could have replaced Sovtecs with tongue saws and still had that bleed. I've got videos about bleed up on the channel. But it's not just, sometimes you get bleed, sometimes you get distortion, but I would look at the 22 or 25 microfarad bypass cap across the 820 cathode for V1 and V2B. And I'd also look at what tubes are in there. Let's see. Thanks, John. Just goofing around a Strat with a Fender, those sounds just kind of happen. Hey, Robert Israel, welcome very much to everyone. Please see there at the down there at the bottom where I say put some question marks before any question, please. It does help them stand out in the chat, so I'm less likely to miss your question, though I did see Robert's. This is not nagging you, Robert. I just want to make sure that if someone asks a question, I see it. Because later in the chat, I've got a lot of stuff there, and the question marks really make them pop. Anyway, he just bought a 1985 Laney ProTube AR9 knob. I think the knob might be a typo. It has some hum issues and reverb not working. Are these amps hard to work on? I have no experience with 85 Laneys, so I don't know what's going on in the ProTube AR9. I'm sorry. You'd have to see if you can find images, but I imagine all that stuff is solvable, but I don't know what construction methods were used in 85 on Laney or what parts they were using. Sorry. I can only be honest. Sometimes the honest answer is, I don't know. Cheese pizza, very good to hear that on your 5F1 build. Let's see. Tone control, you sold the custom deluxe reverb. Fantastic. There's so many better amps out there waiting for you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Swamp Donkey. I mean, it means a lot to me. I try not to put too many of the complimentary things up because it just seems like, kind of self-aggrandizing. But, if I don't put any of them up, it looks like I'm big-headed and above appreciating you guys, and I very much appreciate you guys. So I try to find a balance of just a little bit of the nice things said about me, but not too much, because too much, then it's just ego fest, and no one wants to watch that. I get accused of it enough already. Hey, the governor, what would cause there to be 4 volts DC across my guitar cable tip and sleeve when plugged into a high input of an 80s 2204? Well, you've got DC leakage, and you could have a bad tube in V1. Typically on a 2204, that'd be V1B, because they use them differently. It could also be the unbypassed cathode on V1A, which can make the entire tube act up, especially if the heaters are close to any of the grid wires. You get a lot of issues with the unbypassed cathode, which is certainly being used on even though it's on the second triode, it affects the first. One of the things to watch out for is if the plate voltage, if the plate resistor is too large on a 2204. Like if someone put a 470K in there, you can misbias the V1 tube to the point where you get positive voltage on the input. So you should not have positive voltage on the input. You should not have any voltage on the input, but it does happen. Bad tube first cause. And again, that's a place where I don't like Russian tubes. They don't like that unbypassed cathode. Sometimes you have to go to either a DC heater supply or a DC lift reference for the heater supply to really get that out, unless you're just using old 60s or 70s tubes, which are much better built. But you make sure that no one's modded that amp to have some crazy large value plate resistor. I would not go over 220K typically, because you have so many stages of gain to play with in a 2204. You don't need to crank all the gain in just one stage, especially since you're about to attenuate a lot of it right after that. So check that and report back, but you should not have any voltage across the guitar cable and sleeve. Tone control. Sorry, I'm chronically behind in the emails. It's very difficult. I can only take in so many things, because if I take in every amp that people want me to take, they'd sit here for 6 months and people will get pissed off. I am certainly not the only amp tech in the world. I just try to put concepts out there. Stavros, what do I think about attenuators? I think attenuators are like cars. There are good ones and there are bad ones, and people try to get away with the lowest price possible, and you get what you pay for. At the same time, you can pay for something that you think is really great, and then it turns out to be a Tesla Cybertruck, in which case, so long for all your money, and you don't have a truck. I would suggest doing a bunch of researches on attenuators, making sure you really need one. But a lot of the stuff that was out, that's on the market that's cheap. There's a reason it's cheap. There's a lot of heat there. There's a lot of current there, and it's a very critical point. If that box fails and you don't have a load on your output tubes, you could lose tubes. You can lose the transformer. You could have damage to your power supply. It can be expensive things. So you want to make sure that it's very, very rock solid. So go with a good brand. So beyond that, I can't tell you, because I don't know what your applications are, whether you're just attenuating to a speaker, or whether you need IRs, or whether you need a full load, et cetera, et cetera. It's tough to answer without knowing your individual needs. Hey, Josh Hufford. Original 77 Vibrolux reverb needs new filter caps. Would I recommend replacing all the coupling caps as well? No. Coupling caps are almost never bad in 60s and 70s Vibrolux reverbs or other Fenders. The coupling caps that go bad in old Fenders, the red and yellow Astrons are not to be trusted. They are bad. Change those. Any of the blue, brown, and red ones tend to be fine. People change them. There's a big trend in the 80s to rip them all out and replace them with orange drops. A lot of techs don't understand how DC buildup on a board works. They think it's a bad cap leaking. It's not. It's voltage leaking across the board. Most of the ceramic discs are going to be fine as well. Occasionally you'll find one that is noisy. The ceramic discs are much more prone to this than the film caps. The film caps being the blue Ajax, the big shiny blue ones from the later in 69 through the 70s, and the kind of brick red ones. People will say those sound terrible. No, they sound great. They happen to be in the same era that they used a lot of heavy wax on the board, and that wax becomes conductive. And so people that see the red caps and they hear issues, they think, oh, it's the caps. I'm going to change all that out. So they change them all out, and the process, they heat the board up and lowers the DC built present in the board, and they think, oh, it was the capacitors. No, it's just heat, and you can do that other ways, as I have shown in various videos. What is a Jose mod? Randy Steffs asked. That's something that was done by Jose. Is it Arendozo? I'm sorry if any of Jose's friends and family see this. I don't recall the last name right now. He was a tech working in LA, and he would take Marshalls, both Plexi style and 2203, 2204 JCM800s, and add gain stages. You can just add another gain stage ahead of everything. He also did some various implementations of different master volumes. He also did diode clipping options, which gives you kind of that hair metal sound. Not just hair metal, but also stuff like Motley Crue and Weezer. And it's just a very recognizable sound. Not Weezer. Why did I say Weezer? Motley Crue and Winger. It's just a very recognizable sound. So you get a lot of compression, you get a lot of sustain. You don't get a lot of dynamics with the diode clipping, because that's not what it does. It's supposed to limit dynamics, but it gives you a lot of saturated drive. And so there's not just a Jose mod. On my buddy Jason Tong's video channel, Headfirst Amps, last week he did an amp interview with Dave Friedman and two other of his buddies in the amp world, and they talked about amp design. And one of the things they talked about was Jose mods. So if you want more information, look at that, because Dave has incorporated those in a lot of his amps. So has Jason. And I mean, it's a good thing to know how to do. I tend to think small nudges are better than 18 switches. I'm not saying that Dave and Jason put a ton of options just for the sake of it, but you, as a player, you really have to know what they're doing and have a tonal target in mind. Otherwise, you will just always have option paralysis, and it's going to be like, well, was this better than this? Because you have 7 switches. That's what? Couple 100,000 possible combinations. It gets very confusing. It's nice to know, okay, this makes it louder, this turns on the output, this makes it brighter, etc. But in general, it's a way of getting more gain out of a Marshall. And that led to things like the Soldano SLO and other higher gain amps. Hey, Robbie F. Andy Kulikowski, thank you very much, Andy. Working on his first AMI AC30. Normal channel sounds great, good, but top boost is unbearably harsh unless cut is dimed. Confirmed all components, wiring, swap tubes, advice on where to look. Well, first of all, you can have a bad ceramic cap in there, even if it measures okay out of circuit. So the things I would look at primarily would be the 500 picofarad or 470 picofarad coupling cap off the driver, that because you got one tube stage, then the 500 picofarad and the 500K volume that feeds another stage, and that has a cathode follower for the tone stack. Make sure that 500 picofarad is good. That can be a big cause of it. Make sure your filtering is good. unbearably harsh unless cut is dimed. And make sure that your pots are good and that you have the pots set accurately, because remember, the pots work backwards on a JMI compared to how our brains think of them, as far as the treble and bass. And it's the range that sounds really good on your treble pot is pretty narrow, and the rest of it sounds awful. So make sure it's not, no offense, first time user error. Hey, JDS, I have no idea as to if there is a correlation. 100. What if they're three-way switches, John? A lot of those switches on those amps are three-way switches. Yeah, it's still a lot to remember on stage. 128. Anyway, we're saying I don't know if there's any correlation between the serial numbers and the years, but I can tell you there is no difference between an AC15 custom from this year to that year. That they have not made changes. So if you get say a 2020 or a 2025 or a 2015, it's the same amp. Gary Guitar, yeah, you've got a little potential for current there, for voltage. That's dangerous. So don't use that amp until you take it to a tech. It could be as simple as a defective IEC power cable where you have a break in the ground in the cable, which happens, in which case, great. $10 later, you'll have a new cable. But it could be something inside the amp, and you have to get that checked out before you use that amp again, because yes, it will try to kill you. Are all Russian tube brands the same tubes? Is the price difference just marketing? No. It's just one factory, but that factory makes different models, different specifications, and there is overlap between, hey, this particular tube, this particular spec of tube gets reused by these two different labels or whatever, but like a Sovtek WXA, I think it is a different tube than a Sovtek long plate, the LPS, the long plate spiral, is a different tube than the Tungsol reissue, is a different tube slightly than the Mullard reissue. But they are made in the same factory. It's like Chevy. You could have three different Chevrolets. They all say Chevy. They're all coming from the same factory. They are different cars. The difference being all the differences are really small and inside a little glass tube, and most of us don't know what we're looking at inside there. When you get into marketing price difference, that's when you get into cryogenically treated and gold plated and all that stuff. Now you may find a tube with gold pins does sound really good or sound better than a non-gold plated tube. It's not the gold plating. They'll sort those tubes out because they're going to sell them up market and they want to have fewer returns. So they're going to do a higher grade of sorting on those, and the ones that pass their test, they'll then do the pins with the gold. What do I think of the F&T multi-section 2525 caps for cathode bypass caps? I think they're stupid. I mean, they're huge. They're physically huge. I don't have one because I don't use them, but they are the size of a 500 volt cap, and they do nothing better than two small caps like you see me use my videos. They're expensive. They're very large. They're larger than the originals, so you won't even always be able to get them underneath the original cloth-covered wiring on top of a board. And they're really physically long. So on some boards, you get really bad connections mechanically. So, yeah, look at my videos. I'm using the Vishay 63 volts, and you can get them at tubesandmore.com if you don't want to go through the joy of learning how to use Mauser's ordering system. Thank you, Mitch, the Metalhead. Appreciate that. Tone Control got a 73 deluxe reverb with the money he got from selling the hand-wired custom 64. Now, you are set, man. A 73 deluxe reverb can be made to sound exactly like a 64, 65, 66, and you're not going to pay that extra $2,000 premium. It's a great amp, and once you get it really, really running, it will run decades longer than that hand-wired thing that you sold. Good job, Tone Control. I have the option to buy a Marshall JVM 205H for a pretty good price. Vincent asks, what is the reputation for JVM in regards to longevity, RE caps replacement, and issues? Well, I don't see a lot of them come in, but I don't know how many were bought. I don't know how many people were using them, so I've had a couple come in. I don't know what percentage of the amps in this area that is. When they have come in, they have never had anything major. But the issue that I have with the JVM, like the 410 series, and I think the 205 has the same thing, is the front panel. Behind the front panel with all those pots, each one of those pots is really, really tiny. It's a little bitty, like 9mm green plastic pot with a push-on knob. Now that's critical. The knobs are push-on, and they're all attached to a board which has all the pots and all the switches on them, push switches. Keep that in mind. And so here you have the board, and here you have the chassis, and there are little standoffs coming off the chassis. And it's like a crosshatch made in the tip of the standoff that snaps into that board. But over time, because every time you touch the pot, you're pushing that way. Every time you push the push button, you're pushing this way. It causes the board to flex. And over time, I have seen it, the metal crosshairs, crosshatchings on those standoffs begin to compress in, and the PCB begins to push this way until it gets really loose. And sometimes you cannot retighten that. What I've found so far to work is once I'm sure everything's working, I push the board back in place, and then I use a little flathead screwdriver and gently, very gently, open up the crosshatch in each direction to apply pressure there, and then I put a dab of silicone and cross my fingers. But it's not a really rugged form of construction. That said, the ones that I've done that to have not come back. So I would not build an amp that way, and because I would be worried that these things would all fall apart in 10 years. I have not seen them falling apart. I hope yours doesn't. Robert Israel. Okay, I'm not familiar with 80s Laneys. I'm sorry. Hey, Colby Jack, you didn't have to do that. You donate too much. You can just pay me directly. Happy to have a new car Skylark special on the way. Awesome. The Skylark is a really good amp. It's just not pretty inside, and if you do have to have work done, it can be much higher than comparable amps of the same quality because of the construction methods. If 25 years from now you need to have new filter caps, that's going to be a very expensive proposition. But until that point, it is a very good sounding, very reliable amp. And as I tried to show in the video, because I try to be fair, when he does something right, he's doing all the stuff behind the scenes right. He just really is concerned that things are going to vibrate much more than they ever really would. Hey, David A., what is the best way to reglue Tolex on flaps coming up in a combo amp? I don't know if it's the best way, but it's the way that usually works for me. Say, I thought I had a little Princeton here. Anyway, so if you've got, say this is the bottom of the chassis and you got a little flap that's flapping up, say that's the back bottom edge, I will pull that back until I find where it is still secure, and I will clean all those surfaces as much as possible. I've got like old soft bristle toothbrushes and paint scrapers and stuff. I try to get all the debris off. Anything that's stuck to the old residue over the years, get that clean. I will wet both sides and let it dry. And then I'll take wood glue. I'll use Titebond 2 is what I use. And I will pour this on a little plastic dish, and I'll add a little water to it because I want it to be a little bit thinned, just a little bit thinned. I don't want it to be water with glue in it. I want it to be glue that's been made a little softer. And then I will brush it on both surfaces, both the wood surface and the Tolex, the back of the Tolex, and I want every bit of that to be covered with a thin coat. And then I'll press them in place so that I can get all the squeeze out. And then I separate it and let it air dry for about 2 minutes. And then I put it back in place, and it's going to have a good amount of tack then. And once it's back in place, it wants to almost hold in place by itself. I will then kind of at the same time work out any squeeze out with a paper towel, just a damp paper towel, get that glue off at the top, anything you don't want visible. And then I use some blue painter's tape to reinforce it. So if this is the bottom of the amp, and this is the edge, I'll start here and go like that and then wrap here. So this is where the pressure needs to be, but it's starting on points on the bottom where the Tolex was never disturbed, and on top where it's to the wood inside. So I'm not I'm actually forcing the glued down part to stay in place by getting all the friction on the stuff that's stable, and then I'll let it sit for maybe 2 hours, and then I'll pull it up. But I don't pull it if the flap is on top. I don't pull it from the top. I pull it from the bottom. So I'm pulling it. I'm not going to disturb any of the glue if it hasn't fully set up. And usually that works, and it's cheap, and it works really well. I would not use that to apply Tolex to a wooden cabinet for the first time, but for fixing an old fender, etc., it always works. Hey, Dryfly1, if you're building a Princeton Reaver, yeah, I would recommend a bias pot. The best way to do it is just to do it like a deluxe reverb or super reverb. It's the same thing used in all the AB763s. Just build it, install the bias pot and wire it like the deluxe reverb. So you've got the 10K pot with the wiper going to the bias supply and like 15K to ground. But keep the 100K dropping resistor before the diode in this. So other than and keep the cap. So other than the 27K across that cap, that's you're replacing it with the deluxe reverb style 10K and 15K. That everything else in there stays Princeton, but you just add a variable bias pot. If you have the room in the chassis, you can do it with the same chassis mounted pot that they use in the deluxe reverb. Otherwise, you need to use a small trim pot mounted on the little bias PCB. And it's pretty easy to do if you think about it. Hold your mouth just right. And thank you for noting that I keep the ads away. I don't like watching ads on videos. Now, I have premium, so I don't see them anymore, but I pay for that privilege. I just don't want to be one of those channels like, hey, here's a 3-hour-long video, and every 3 minutes you're going to hate me. Speaking of which, we've been going almost 30 minutes. YouTube thinks I should be showing most of you guys an ad right now. All right. Vincent Q asked the same question about the JVM 205H twice. I usually put this up here. I have not done it yet, but please only ask the question once, because I saw your question the second time. I thought, I scrolled wrong. I got to go. I'm back where I was. I got to go down, and I wasn't. So please only ask a question once to everyone. I will get to it. And it says person turquoise waving. I don't see the emojis on here, so you don't need to do emoji, guys, because I won't see it. I'll just see a text description of it, which always is very bizarre. Hey, Daniel Cox. Hot Rod DeVille had burnt screen resistor. Replaced both screen resistors and plate resistors and coupling caps and phase inverter. Still crazy loud crackle and just power amp. Any suggestions? All voltages look good. Yeah, if you're doing the power amp return in the it's like plugging into the effects return loop to verify that you have a good power section. Once you use the effects return, you're using the low voltage supply, and the low voltage supply in those amps almost always goes bad. See, every video I've got on a Hot Rod or Blues DeVille or Deluxe, they're all the same thing with the 5-watt Zeners and the 5-watt resistors, and they just burn up the board, damage the traces, and eventually take out the capacitors in that section. So if anytime that you use the effects loop in a Hot Rod or Deluxe, you are using the low voltage supply to power the op amps for that. And if you have a problem with the low voltage supply, you will hear that. If you don't do that, you'll hear it as weirdness in the reverb, or you'll hear issues with the changing channels. But as soon as you go into the effects loop in any form, you're in the land of the solid state stuff, and you're the victim of the bad low voltage supply. But good for you for changing out the plate resistors and the phase inverter. Those always go bad in Hot Rod DeVille's, as do the screens. They're really not good amps. Fix it and sell it. Arredondo. Thank you, Gas Station Sushi. Arredondo. And tone control. I think I already answered your question about your mint condition 73 deluxe reverb. You are half the money from that 64 deluxe custom reverb. You are so set, man. You just won the internet, man. And I'm glad to play a small part in that. And thank you. Sorry about the sinuses. All the oak trees are flowering right now. It's oak tree bukkake in our neighborhood. Sorry. What do I think of ultralinear as opposed to standard grid mode advantages? Well, if you want a really loud, really clean amp, ultralinear lets you do that. If you want an amp that has more of a softness to it and a little more breakup, then you don't want it. It's a vanilla versus chocolate versus raspberry ripple kind of question. The nice thing is you can have a whole bunch of different amps, different power configurations. That said, given styles today, most people are not going to want the ultralinear. But if you're like a Jerry Garcia nut, say a 135 watt Silverface Twin would make you so happy, even if you don't know it. They have their role for pedal steel. They have the role for the Jerry Garcia kind of stuff, I guess, but for most players, it's a really hard feel. And like Dr. Dinah says, I'm sorry, Ted Mitch there says, the market voted on ultralinear guitar amps. That's why there aren't very many made today. Of course, then people obsess about getting a steel string swinger or stinger or whatever it is, the Dumble thing, because they want that magical sound. And that thing's cleaner than an ultralinear Fender, because Dumble just used the output section of an SVT to make that thing. It's just an SVT output section, which is very clean because it's all cathode follower output stages. Let's see, where were we? Hey, did Amnesia, what do I think about expensive Emerson Jensen caps, Blue Sprague Adams, etc.? I'm thinking about using the Mojo Tone Vibroverb with loose grounds as my upgrade unit. Any 10-inch speaker suggestions? Well, first of all, show me where Emerson and Jensen are making their capacitors. Blue Sprague Adams, those are garbage. Don't use Sprague filter caps these days. They're tiny little generic caps rated for 65 degrees, put in a great big blue housing and sold to you for $30. Just garbage. You can use Emerson or Jensen, but you can also use the Vishay MKT 1813s that I like. You can use any orange drop series you like, though the polyester is going to be more appropriate in a Vibroverb. You can use Sozos. You can use the generic yellow IC ones. Film caps, the material matters less than the value. Ceramic disc caps, the material matters as much as the value. Let's put it that way. And a 10-inch speaker suggestion for a Vibroverb. There's so many great choices out there, but I don't know what sound you're going for. So tell me in the chat what kinds of sound you're looking to get. Maybe I can help you with some specific 10-inch speaker suggestions. I can tell you 5 off the top of my head, all of which are very good sounding, and they're very different sounding. So it's your money. I'd want to be a little more than, hey, that sounds good. I want to be, that's the one. But you won't. You 6 times 30 is $180. That's what you'd spend for Sprague Adams for a Vibroverb. That could be your 2 speakers right there, and you'd actually get something worth having. No, Andy, I've not had any bad MOD caps. Where'd you get them from? Put that in the chat. I'd like to know. I know that one guy had a bad batch from CE, and he reached out to CE, and CE identified the specific batch number, and they pulled all those, and they contacted MOD. But that was like a year and a half, 2 years ago. So, okay, AES, all right. All bets are off. It might have been that batch that CE pulled. I don't know. I have... see if you can, I assume they're going to replace them for you, but I've not had any, but I will keep an eye out. Thank you. I just ordered another 20. What's the difference in sound between Sozo caps and orange drop caps? Well, Sozos are all polyester. Orange drop, if you compare the Sozo to the 400 volt or 600 volt polyester orange drops, you won't hear much of a difference. If you compare it to the polypropylene orange drops, you might hear a slight difference in the transient response. You might. Some people will, some people won't. Material matters a slight bit. You will pay more for the Sozos, and the Sozos do kind of look like the stuff that Jimmy Page used to put on his amps. I think that's where most of the price difference comes in. But I will say in Sozo's defense that in a Fender and most eyelet-style boards, the axial-style cap, like the Sozo, is a better mechanical choice than the radial-style cap of an orange drop. But if you do amp repair, Reinhardt, order a bunch of different caps and try them all out and see what you think. Recommendations for best upgrades for about $100 parts for 65 Deluxe Reverb issue are using the Alessandro speaker, but occasionally run head into other cabs. All right, well, yeah, the Alessandro or other speaker would be the number one upgrade. Tightening all the hardware is free. Moving the screen grids to the octal tubes off the board, and moving the heater wires to the octal boards. If you can do the work yourself, that's whatever the cost of 2 new screen grid resistors is. So $150. Adding a mid spot is very nice, and that's what for most people maybe $5 for the pot, $2 for a knob. Taking out the bright cap is free if you know how to do it. Thanks, Tone Control. Thanks, written on top of a purple heart. Like I said, I don't see the stickers and emojis, which makes this whole thing a little bit extra. I do want you guys to hear something, because the way microphones work is if this is the noise level and this is the peak of the signal, then the average stuff is here. And I set it so on playback, you're hearing from basically here to here, and you may not hear the noise level, but I want you to hear what I'm hearing from this bassman in the room right now, with the volume at like 2 on the amp. What is that at? All right, so just below 3. With the guitar volume off, I'm going to turn up the mic pre and let you guys hear what this thing really sounds like. Tell me when you hear it. You guys hear that? That is like 4 times louder than it should be. But that is much, much lower than the self noise of a 68 custom Deluxe Reverb or the 64 hand-wired custom Deluxe Reverb. But when this is done, all that background noise at this level will be gone, and a lot of that is just the old wires from the input jacks and from the volume pots. That wire gets so sensitive to noise, it's like it degrades. All right. But that's in the background. Much nicer. If I remembered how the thing went, it would sound much better. All I do is get these amps ready for players who remember how to do all the things. So once I'm done, the stuff you just heard will still be there. All that is going to be gone. And a lot of that is just pure, unrefined janitorial skill. Did I say unrefined? I meant to say unrestrained. Well, I'm not very refined either. Let's see here. Michael Fioca, Silverface Twin Reverb, use 1 millimeter diameter leads for octal heaters and 0.75 millimeter for heaters on Novel sockets. Too much strain on sockets, so 18 and 20. No, you're fine. 18 is great for using on the octals, and you can go down to 20 from the octals to the rest. You could go down. You could do 18 and 22 if you're really worried about strain on the sockets. Basically, you got to look at what the current draw of the heaters for each tube is. It's what 300 milliamps per triode on the 12X and AT, or is that it's half that? I don't remember. You can add it up. You can say, all right, I got 6 12A X AY ATs, whatever. That's going to be this much current. Well, okay, let me do 20 for the first two, and then I can use 22 for the rest going back to the input, and then 18 for the 6L6s just to be sure. Because with the 6L6, it's not just the normal current draw. You have to look at it as if, what if something goes wrong, if you have a plate to ground short, even a partial one, or a failure within a tube. It's nice to have a little bit of overhead on the heaters on the octals. So I think you did that exactly right. But you can go down to a 22 for the Novels. Dale Boyle, I have no experience with the PS2A. I have I don't remember which one it was. I remember it was PS1, I think, that I had, and that's the only one I've had experience with. But contact Sir and contact Fryette and see if they both agree that would be a good pairing. But they're both great products from great companies, and they both know that product better than I do, and they will give you an honest, good answer. Hey, Josh Hufford. Yeah, I've got some videos I put up, 6 months ago about, I think they're called Boring and Even More Boring, about how to order parts from Mouser and CE and DigiKey and stuff like that. So look for those. I think those are in my Tech Tips playlist. Anyway, they're easy to spot once you get to that playlist because the thumbnails are white with like blue and yellow capacitors in the background. They stand out. Let's see. Tone Control, sell your 64 Princeton as well because it's not very good either. I'm sorry. I wish for that price they should do your laundry, but they're not. Hey, Kevin Kane, 79 Fender Princeton Reverb. Would like to have it updated. Filter caps. What brand of electrolytics would be best? Film caps, axial caps. Well, you probably won't need to change any of the film caps. Just electrolytics. Check out literally every vintage Fender I've got in my vintage Fenders playlist. You'll get a good sense of what I use. I talk about all these things. I typically use MOD and F&T filter caps for the large value stuff. I typically use Vishay for the smaller value stuff for the electrolytics. And when I do need to change a film cap, you can find which choices I make and why in those videos, and what values I use for the picofarad values. So almost any amp within my vintage Fenders playlist will give you a much better answer than I can give you right now. The 6L6 that works, that's biased correctly, that has no issues, that's not microphonic, that's the correct one for Vibroverb Dumble. Does it even matter? If you can afford to play the new old stock game, you can afford to have a tech explain all this to you over a long lunch with pizza and beer. It matters less than the pick you use, and it matters a hell of a lot less than the person who's holding the pick. What mods would I do for a Fender Pro Reverb? It depends on the year. If it's a 60s one, I wouldn't mod it at all. If it's early 70s, I make it more like the 60s one. If it was a late 70s, I'd talk to the owner and see if he wanted to keep the ultralinear or not. I like the ultralinear late 70s Pros and such, but they do have some issues. I wouldn't really mod it other than removing the bright cap on the the pull boost master volume. I wouldn't ever let them pull it, boost it. Might take that out. It lets me redo the grounding of the reverb circuit a bit better, and I would take out the bright cap. Other than that, just keep it clean and reduce the amount of spaghetti in there. So not really modding it, just going back towards the standards the amp had about 1964, 65 as far as how they're built. Is that a mod? Hey, John. No, I don't. I don't add a bias balance circuit to Blackface amps because I don't find that it's really that necessary. It's good to have matched tubes, but it could be done. But it's a complication most amps don't need, and it does change the behavior of the bias circuit a little bit. Words with a clock as the A. I appreciate the super sticker, Swamp Donkey. I just have no idea what it was. I'll see it afterwards. This shows up in YouTube, but I'm not viewing this in YouTube. It's complicated on my end. Do I have videos on adding mids, presence, master to Fender amps? Well, I don't add presence to Fender amps. Fender amps that have it, I retain it like an old blonde basement or something. But I have shown adding mids pots and master volumes to Fender amps several times. Go through my Fenders playlist. You will find at least 33 videos showing all that stuff. I'm not trying to sound dismissive or sarcastic. I mean, I can't say, oh, is this video I did last Tuesday or last year on the 7th of September or whatever. They're out there. I've done it a lot. I don't watch my own channel that much after I do the video. I'm editing the video. During the process of editing the video, I've seen that content 50 times. I'm sick of myself. I'm sick of everything in that video. Then I've got to upload it, then I got to watch it one more time to make sure the upload went through. There wasn't anything too terribly stupid in it because I misspeak because I'm doing them live without a script. And then I don't watch it again for a long-ass time, so I forget which is what. Because it's like you guys, musicians, I'm sure a lot of you were in theater or, so rehearsals, endless rehearsals, every line of your dialogue, everyone else's dialogue. You don't want to hear that, think about that stuff ever again. Or you've been in the studio, and by the time you're done mixing a track, you hate that song. You hate everyone involved in it. You don't want to be there again, and listening to that music again for the 10 millionth time is the last thing you ever want to do. It's on a smaller scale. That's what producing videos is like. Let's see. Hey, Bambiel, any suggestions on using a Cascode for pentode kind of performance? It's tricky. There are ways to do it. I think it's probably better because then you would only be using one tube triode and the other one could be free for other things. To either do a Cascode using one triode and one, what's it called? LM 147, whatever, the MOSFET, LM, I can't remember, the 201, I can't remember what it's called right now. You can either do it that way as a Cascode with the MOSFET, or you can just do the MOSFET as a switched additional gain stage in series with the triode. LND 150, thank you, Ted. My brain and numbers. Yeah, the LND 150. You could use that as a Cascode with one tube stage, one tube triode, or you could do just an added gain stage with the LND 150 to give a little bit more drive and play around with accentuating different harmonics. Both of those could work, but I'm not going to give specific suggestions beyond that because I don't have I'd have to have Spice loaded up so I can say, hey, and if you've changed this variable, then you get this kind of thing. Raspberry Ripple. Well, Emmett, if you're just replying to Raspberry Ripple, you may not be live. You may be behind the chat. Make on the screen, right about here probably, there should be a little live thing. It'll be either white or red, and you want to make sure that that's live. Hey, Kevin Kane. Well, I'm glad you found me, however you found me. Andy Talamanta is good. I meant to reach out to you the other day. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Andy. It means a lot to me. I found those missing tubes. Remember, we had those extra 6v6s here? I found them. I need to get them back to you. So I'll call you today or tomorrow. Sorry, this has been a crazy week with some other stuff that we don't need to get into, but I found that box of tubes. They were exactly where I put them, and I put them somewhere safe where they would not get lost. They were so safe that I forgot about it, but I have found them, and I'll ship them to you. Thank you very much, Andy. I believe in paying for quality, but not beyond that point. So there are bad sounding caps out there. There are unreliable caps out there, and there are great caps out there. And if I'm looking at a $2 cap versus a 30-cent cap, the $2 cap sometimes will win. If I'm looking at a $2 cap versus a $7 cap, it's hard pressed to find any difference to justify that extra $5 per capacitor. I think people like to have the most expensive thing, to tell people that they have the most expensive thing, because it's cheaper to buy that sense of self-satisfaction than to sit down and practice until your point where people say, wow, you sound great, regardless of what you're plugged into. Now, I'm not saying that only the playing matters. You play really well into a crappy sounding amp, people say, well, despite the amp, he sounds good. But a really great amp gets out of your way as a player, and you can really get every little nuance. Now, I can talk the talk, and when pro players come over here and play these amps, then you hear it in effect. I wish I could play as well as I speak. I don't have time to do the practice anymore, and my hands are all messed up. Hey, Jolly Bobby Yoger. I am well. What do I have to do in a circuit to make an amp punchy? Is it true that multiple channels on a transformer reduces punchiness? Channels on a transformer? I mean, secondaries? I wouldn't worry about the punchiness of the transformer in terms of how it's constructed beyond, there are aspects of transformer construction that do play a role. But from a regular tech's and a player's perspective, not a transformer designer's perspective, voltage and current, the ability to provide the desired amount of voltage and the required amount of current is one big part of that, because if you are providing the voltage when the current demand is low, but then you ask more current and the voltage drops, that takes away the punch. Voltage, just as a hard and fast rule in a circuit, the DC voltage affects the headroom. So if the headroom is lower, you will not have the punch. If the headroom sags when you get a big transient, you will not have the punch. So you get like a amp like a 71 Marshall Super Lead with 550 volts on the plates, and you're playing on the clean side of things, my God, that amp's going to be punchy. You will physically feel that in the room. It'd be like David Byrne. And it's a hell of a sensation. And the thing is, it doesn't have that much preamp gain in comparison to other things, so it still has that punch, that articulation at its higher gain settings and with an overdrive pedal, whatever. But if you were to then play, say, that 75 Marshall from the other day with the 330 plate volts, you never get that impact, but you also get a nice compression and a bloom to things. So beyond that, I'd really have to have like 4 amps set up here to say, all right, here's amp A, here's amp B, here's the same loop plate in each, and here are the variables that are making the sound different. Any opinions on vintage Music Man 112 RD50? Yeah, there were good amps. A lot of the solid state stuff in those amps is getting harder and harder to find. It is an obsolete technology, which is, there are dwindling resources for the solid state stuff. The tube stuff works really well. The good news is if you can find the solid state components necessary to restore one, that buys you another 30, 40 years most likely. The problems with music men on the hybrid stuff is that the bias board and some other stuff in the voltage supply has the same issue that Leo put into the 60s and 70s Fenders, is that the board warps, and as it warps, all the longitudinally mounted components that are ripple, if the component's going this way and the board ripples, it pulls it out, and so you have to reflow everything on that fiber board. But if you like the sound of a Music Man, it's a well-made amp. I find them personally very harsh and hard, and not the sound I like to play, but someone else is going to love it. Thanks, Jez Bass. I appreciate that. Hey, Taylor Nutt. Avoid the Fender Princeton recording apps. The recording part of that thing is a heat mismanagement nightmare. It likes to burn itself up. It is very gimmicky. Just get a Princeton reverb. I mean, if you get a Princeton reverb, and just any Princeton reverb, and then go get like a Shure reactive load for $600. There's your recording setup, much better than anything that used to come from Fender for recording. You're going to have really good sounding direct sounds with that thing, and the amp will be safe. And then you can go play live and still hear yourself through the Princeton speaker, and it's going to be a much better Princeton than the Princeton recording. So, skip the recording app. Sorry. Hey, Vincent G. 2013. Okay, that's important. Yeah, 2013. Well, that's 12 years ago. You're probably still good on the filter caps and stuff. You're probably another 10 years away from needing that. Probably 10 years away from needing any worries about that. I'm not a huge fan of the 205, but if you play one and it does everything that you need an amp to do, and if the price is right, go for it. It's not I don't think it's going to be a fantastic amp. I don't think you'll think about it longingly 20 years from now. Oh, when I had that amp, the world was perfect. But I don't think you'll regret it, and I don't think it'll catch on fire. And make sure you never use a real ABX test when listening to capacitors, else you're going to be doing a lot of refunding. Where was there a first part to that? Well, I think he's agreeing with me. Yeah, when I got curious about this, I had a Deluxe Reverb, and a Deluxe Reverb is one of the simplest amps Fender ever made. And I temporarily put in a whole bunch of 3- and 5-way switches, basically like 20 variations on a decade box. So I could change resistor types. I could change capacitor types. Made sure the values were all the same, like all the 220K resistors measured within like 1% of each other. Whether it's carbon comp, metal film, carbon film, et cetera, metal oxide. I would have like polyester orange drop, polypropylene orange drop, polyester Mallory 150M, another thing, all within very close capacitances to each other. Then I'd have like Murata MLCs for the ceramics versus various kinds of other ceramics for not dipped versus silver mica. And I would. It was a lot of work for me to do this, but I had it built into a sheet that sat on top of the amp, and I could not see what it was. I just had the switches, and it was like cap 7, and then 1 through 5 was the position, and I would just play. I didn't remember what 1 through 7 was. I had written down a notebook that was in the other room, and I would just play and try different things, and I would keep a little note. Hey, I think I like this. All right. Then I'd go to lunch, and I'd come back, and I don't remember what my notes said. I'd repeat it, and if I still said, yeah, I think I really like 2 here and 4 here. Hey, I liked it 2 hours ago as well, because I don't remember numbers. So I was blinding myself. And then I had then then girlfriend, now wife, come in and flip some of the stuff randomly to make sure that the stuff that I said, hey, that was the position I liked, I could identify again. And so I came to some conclusions about where in a Fender circuit materials matter and where they don't. And I was surprised. A lot of the mythology kind of stripped away. And at the end of that, I was like, hey, no one ever talks about this, but this is important. I think on that note, we are at the top of the hour. And I think we're going to go for our first 7-minute intermission. So I'll see you guys in 7 minutes. All right, we're going to get back into this a little bit early, just so we can get through as many questions as possible. Before you're hearing the normal channel, here's the bass channel. Martin and others were asking about whether bassmen were usable for guitar. You guys tell me. I think so. I think very much so. I'm going to take this little nag off, but it's nice to have a graphic so I don't have to talk about boring stuff. Film caps don't show polarity. Doesn't really matter which direction on install. Film caps don't have polarity as such, but some film caps have what's called an outer foil end. And if that outer foil end is at the side of the capacitor with the lowest impedance, you will have a reduction in noise and a resistance to crosstalk and intermodulation and bleed from other adjacent things. In some amps, in some parts of a circuit rather, the lowest impedance is ground. In other parts of the circuit, the lowest impedance can be B+, so it can be a little bit confusing when you're first getting your head around it. In general, it's not that critical, but if you want to just have everything tied up with a neat little bow, it's not bad practice to get into. And that's one of the reasons I like using the MKT 1813s, which do have the outer foil correctly identified. At least so far, I've not found any in testing that was misidentified. And if you look at the old blue Ajax that Fender used, they always had the outer foil marked, and they were installed with that in mind. But not all caps have an outer foil. Not all film caps have an outer foil. ABX testing, the bane of audiophiles. I have been known in the past to put up hey, you like this speaker better than this speaker in a video, and have the exact same sound clip play. One saying speaker A, one saying speaker B, and people will identify differences between them when it's the exact same recording. I haven't done that in a while, but I have done that in the past, and it's fun to watch the opinions fly based on someone trying desperately to have something interesting to say about something. Talk about the hiss and crackle from the amp. What's it like with volume at 0? It's much lower at 0, but it's not nothing. And the normal channel is noisier than the bass channel. So I've got some ideas where to go next, but it will be dead silent with the volume at 0 soon, and much, much quieter without so much streaky bacon. Yeah, the current Pro Reverb isn't really a Pro Reverb. It's a good amp, but it's not a Pro Reverb. John Hathaway, yeah, the MLCCs the TDK MLCCs are incredibly better than any of the tantalums in old Mesas. Of course, for larger values, you'll want to use electrolytics, but you can use MLCCs, you can use little films, little ceramics, anything but tantalum, please. Tantalum bypass caps and Mesas are just as bad an idea as using the 400-volt caps that they do everywhere. I don't understand the cult of Mesa. Did Amnesia trying to make a 63 Brown Vibroverb sound like a 64, 65 Vibroverb? 63 Brown Vibroverb is a different circuit than the 64, 65 Vibroverb. But as far as the speaker goes, I think Weber's got a 15-inch JBL. They do. It's in their Legacies, not their Legacy. I'd have to look at the website. Ted Weber Speakers has got their version of a JBL D130. The 15-inch would probably be the sound you're looking for. Can't get a copyright strike if you play it wrong. Exactly. Which Fender kit out there is worth building and tricking out? Mojotone's the safest bet that I know of, but I've not I don't have any direct experience with what StewMac is selling. I think they might be the same thing. And someone else just got CE just got into that game as well, but I've not. They just introduced that. I've not even looked at the pictures. I know that Mojotone is going to give you really good stuff, and the issue is different models. Some of the instructions are good, some of the instructions are not as great, or the circuit's correct, but the layout's copying mistakes from 1962, or keeping features that you don't need today. It gets frustrating for us techs to deal with the kits. I don't keep up with kits because I don't build kits, and I tend not to accept kit builds in for repair because it's cheaper for me to build you an amp than for me to undo a ton of bad work. And I don't mean that to be conceited, but every tech I know will say the same thing. When everything is wrong, it's cheaper just to gut and start again. Hey, Sun Tzu, got a gig today with a C2X. You modded with my mods. How are those normally biased from the factory? How hot are they? They're usually about 100 to 110% idle dissipation. You're usually going to be about 13, 14 watts idle dissipation, which is absolutely good with EL84s, especially if you did the 1K screens with the 2-watt resistors and the 3K grid stoppers that I mentioned. But if you're concerned, you can cool off the bias, but the sound of an AC30 should be anywhere between 12 and 14 watts idle dissipation. And remember, if you're measuring the idle dissipation, pardon me, if you're measuring that based on the voltage drop across the cathode resistor, which most people do, 5%-ish of what you're measuring is also screen current. So if you measure 14 watts, well, that's including the screen and the plate. So multiply that by 0.95, get an idea of what the plate itself probably is closer to. Hey, Surge98, I'm working on a 2204 build. Are there any mods to the stock circuit that are worth trying out for classic rock and 80s rock? Yeah, I've got a couple up on the video, a couple of videos up on the channel. One comes to mind. It was an 80s 2204 and a Seriatone 2204. I did the similar mods to both, doing some cathode changes and taking out some bright caps to make them a bit thicker. Look on the channel under the Marshalls playlist. You might find some stuff where I show basic mods on 2204s. You don't have to go as far as the Jose mods and adding gain stages. You can just nuance what you already have to work with in good ways. At some point, you will find yourself fighting oscillation, though. So you've got to really know what you're doing. And first, make sure that, hey, this stock JCM 800 2204 works perfectly well. Why not just try some overdrive pedals in front of it, which is what a lot of the guys back in the day did. So you can chase your tail doing a lot of mods versus using a $50, $70 yellow Boss pedal. There it is. I've got to rebuild a selenium rectifier and a tape machine with a silicon rectifier. What would be the best board to construct it on? Well, if you're just replacing a rectifier with a diode, replacing the selenium with a diode, which I recommend, then just use depending on the space you have available, just a terminal board, a terminal strip. It can be just a regular one, or it can be a fancy one like this. Let's see if I can get it to focus. Can you guys see that? Let me do this. Anyway, or just a regular ugly terminal strip, because all you need to worry about is a diode or 2 diodes in series, and maybe a resistor in series with that, just to give the voltage drop that you would have had from the selenium if it's a really particular part of the circuit. Most of the times you can just sub in a 1 in 4007 for any selenium rectifier, and it works just fine. But just anything to mount it to that's not connected to the chassis, So 3 terminal strip with ground in the middle. They'll give you a place to mount a diode. Pardon me. Let's see. Daniel C's saying yes, the Sir and the Fryette are very, very good. What about the ones that haven't failed yet? Friedman's haven't lasted 50 years yet. No, they haven't, but they will. Most of them will if people take care of them. Yeah, Mesa fanboys are going to fanboy. Yeah. Hey, let's Ghost. I don't bring, if I'm recapping or building a new amp, I don't bring it up slowly with a Variac. You probably should. And I don't mean this just you, but if you've not done several thousand amps in your life, you should probably be very cautious applying power. I am very cautious in how I build things, and I know everything's right. So I powered up for the first time on a current limiter, but not a Variac. But you should use both a Variac and a current limiter, or at least a way of measuring current. So if you get to 40 volts and all of a sudden you're drawing crazy current, power it off before you go any higher. So it's going to by the time you have done this often enough to not need to do that, you will know the answer to your own question. Until then, yes, use a Variac. Yeah, built like a tank rusting in a field somewhere. Hey, Michael P., I'm glad that you're here. I hope that you have nothing but joy and longevity with your Mesa Mark V combo. My thoughts on build quality? My thoughts on Mesa build quality are like military intelligence. Well, I say that. Right now the military is looking pretty smart in comparison to some other branches of government. But yeah, there's tons of things to watch out for. I'm not a fan of Mesas. I think Mesas have been a long con, and the Mark V is one of the ticking time bombs that they offer, with the most stuff crammed in the smallest space. And I don't think they sound very good. Mesas are one of the only companies I know whose clean channel is almost always dramatically noisier than their gain channel. Now, yours may be perfect, yours may be ideal, and long may it last. I'd love for you to have one of the ones that just never has a problem. Just statistically, it's unlikely that you will not have a problem with it. As far as anything to watch out for, see my Amps Under $1,000 video, and where I go through a lot of the common failures of Mesas. And I've got a what makes Mesas great video up that goes into some more detail. Sorry to be the one to tell you. What tube manufacturer do I prefer for vintage Blackface amps? Well, right now I'm using, typically for 6L6s, I'm using Tungsol SDRs. For 6V6s, I'm using Electro Harmonix. For 12AX7s/7025s, I'm using the Electro Harmonix 7025s. For spots like V5 in a reverb amp, which is just driving the tremolo, I'll usually go with the JJ ECC 83 because it costs less than the Electro Harmonix 7025. For AT7s, I'm still buying the Joint Army Navy new old stock Philips for about $30 because they're fantastic. And whenever possible, I go with the new old stock 5U4 GBs, also from the Joint Army Navy stuff. And for rectifier tubes, I alternate between, for the GC34, usually JJ is a pretty safe bet. And for a 5Y3, that gets tricky. Sometimes the Electro Harmonix, sometimes the new old stock. Very, very rarely have I found a Sovtech 5Y3 that actually is a 5Y3. Sorry, that's a long answer. What is the best way to ship 2 amp heads from USA to Europe? Does it make sense to invest in a travel case? I think it does, but my God, it's going to be expensive. For the price of that, you could rent other gear while you're in Europe. Unless you're moving to Europe, in which case you need to have them, I would strongly suggest, especially you're going to have wall voltage differences, see if you can rent comparable amps if you're going to be playing in Europe, because shipping 2 very expensive, very heavy amps like that to Europe and then back, and then having to deal with step-up transformers and all that, I really suspect that your best bet might be to rent something for a tour if that's the case. You have to remember that the really big acts, the ones that play in Europe and America a lot, they've got their European gear that's already there on the continent, and they've got, if they're playing in England or Ireland, they've got ferries. And they have their U.S. Canada rig, So trying to emulate what guys with multi-million-dollar budgets do without having multiples of millions of dollars can be very difficult. Hey, sent to me. I got a hum buzz that increases when either the norm or Cub channel volume controls. Low, even when off, lead dress tubes. I don't know what amp it is, and I cannot tell you the cause of hum buzz when the volumes are off on an amp that I don't know what is. So tell me what the amp is. Maybe I might have some idea. But as it's written, it's very difficult for me to make out your question. And sent to me, I don't know if English is your second language, and you might need to run that through Google Translate a second time, or post it in the original language. We've got a very multilingual audience here. We can work together on translating this stuff. I don't consider a Pro a low wattage amp. A Pro is a loud one. Vibrolux is straddling the line. Deluxe Reverb is kind of the dividing point for me. I don't personally use attenuators for any of these, but if I had to, I'd probably look and see what the SUR options are, or budget requirements, maybe the Fryette options. But I don't use attenuators on those amps, and if I absolutely have to, I just install a little Larimar Master Volume, because it's less to go wrong, greatly lowers the expense, and it's so simple, and it's one less thing to carry with you as far as attenuation goes. Now, if you need to have a front-of-house speaker emulation as opposed to just an attenuation, then you have to go into the other issue, the other options like the SUR and the Fryette and all that. But just as far as reducing the output level of a Fender, I'd put an Larimar and spend $10. Granted, that's me. I can do that. I wouldn't charge myself unless I was in a self-hating mode. The latest incarnation of the Vox AC30 hand-wired series claims they fixed the power supply circuit and addressing ghost notes, Kenichi says. What was wrong with the previous production circuit? Well, the previous one, if they mean the hand-wired that's been on the market for the past 20 years, the fawn-colored one, doesn't have any ghost notes. It's hideously over-filtered and sounds really hard and unvox-like. Now, I have not seen any of the new ones, so I don't know what they're fixing, but an AC30 is supposed to ghost. It's supposed to. If you listen to Rory Gallagher, you listen to Old Queen before 1975, you hear ghosting. Now, Queen, Brian May had his amps beefed up so they ghost less, but he's using his AC30s for a very specific thing that other people don't do. But the same things that make an AC30 ghost, the lower filtering, are the things that give it a certain character at the edge of breakup that gives it the sound that you would associate with a lot of the AC30 clean to semi-dirty to dirty stuff, where the sound is very harmonically rich. A lot of that is the lower filtering. So I don't know what the new ones are doing. I know what the old ones were doing, and they did not ghost because they were neutered as far as, they were just, the character was prevented from forming in the old ones. John, electrolytic caps are designed to last about 20 years. I would change out all the bypass caps because he thinks it's sounding good, but he doesn't know if it's sounding right. If you have a failing filter cap, you get risk of fire and burning things, so they have to be changed. If you have a failed cathode bypass cap, which is very low voltage, you're not going to damage the amp, but it's like, what's the best analogy for this? Think of those capacitors as being like a 9-volt battery. And you think everything's fine, but everything's so old that it's operating at 3 volts. And it's supposed to be at 9 volts, but it's still operating. And that's the sound you hear. You're not used to the sound. That's the sound you're used to. You're used to the sound of a sick amp, and you think that's what it's supposed to sound like. That's not what it was when it was new. So if he wants us to keep the original cathode bypass caps, sure. I mean, he'll hear it if they begin to fail. You'll have less gain, or you have oscillation. If for the shared cathode stuff, like the reverb mixer and reverb recovery stage, if that bypass cap fails, the amp's going to shriek horribly, but nothing will catch on fire. But it will sound better and be a known good thing with 7 new cathode bypass caps. And it's not a lot of money, and it's easy to do. So I just don't see the argument for keeping the old Mallory's. But yeah, technically, it won't catch on fire if he keeps the old Mallory's in and they fail. Whenever I see an amp come in where someone did a filter cap for the main filters but left the cathode bypass caps, I think that amp tech was saying, all right, I'm going to do the bare minimum, knowing that within 5 years they'll have to bring it back to me. I'll make more money. And a lot of those techs will change out the cathode bypass caps as they fail, because each time they come in, it's another $100 bench fee or whatever it is. It's $15 worth of caps. Change them all out. See it again in 25 years. Hey, Andy Kulikowski. Best place in the United States to send Vox 1088 silver Alnico selections for Recone. Scumbag Weber? Neither. Send them to my buddy, Dave Halford. HalfordLoudspeakers.com. HALFORD loudspeakers.com. He's here in Memphis. He's about a mile from my house. He's a really good guy. He's very knowledgeable. He's been doing speakers all his life. His dad was a speaker reconer. He used to run speaker services. Now it's just Halford Loudspeakers. He also does hi-fi stuff. He knows more about speakers than I do. If you ask me about amps, you get a long-winded reply. You ask him about speakers, hold on, he'll tell you. He loves this stuff, and he knows this stuff, and he recones stuff perfectly. And he knows the difference between the silver 1088 and the blue previous ones and all that. He gets the right materials, gets the right kits from Celestion, etc. And he's like $65 to $85 per speaker and about 6 weeks turnaround. And in Memphis, FedEx makes shipping very good. So look up Halford Loudspeakers, and he will take care of you. Yeah, Sun Tzu, if the new AC30s are more overfiltered than the previous hand-wired AC30s, these things are going to be painfully stiff. I play a standard hand-wired reissue, and I'm like, man, this ain't it. I mean, the standard little custom thing is a better feeling approximation than the hand-wired. It just doesn't look as expensive. You meant multiple amp channels on a single power output transformer? No, that won't affect it at all. It's about voltage and current. You can have one channel, you can have 3 channels. If you design it properly, that's not going to be the variable. You design it properly, you're only going to have one channel active at once. So. Hey, Bayvan, I have no experience with RST RFT. I don't know. I'm sorry. But if you're working with Jason, call Jason and ask him if he has experience with RST RFT. I have experience with old RFTs, but old RFTs are not going to cost the same as JJ. So I suspect that it is not a true RFT, and I wonder who's making it and if it's the same tube sold as other brands and made from in China. I don't know, so I cannot tell you. Sorry. In terms of efficiency, pre or post phase inverter master volume. In terms of efficiency of what? It's easier to install a pre. The amp sounds better with a post. As far as impact on the signal, you're gonna when they're on 10, you're gonna lose a little bit of level at all times with the pre. Post and phase invert master volume, if it's done right, on 10 it's out of the circuit because it's replacing part of the stock circuit. So I guess the answer is post phase inverter. Cool, Sun Tzu. That's a fun book. I think Brad's got the damn thing memorized. You know, Brad pretends he's stupid. He'll say, I'm stupid, I'm an idiot. That dude is so fucking smart. He's not here so I can say these things. Don't tell him I told you that. I think you guys knew that. Thank you, Genial Hawaiian. I'm not going to get into that on here today. I try not to discuss about things like that. But, you know, when I see what's happening in the country, it's so tempting just to talk about it on here. But we're not going to get into that. But your thoughts are very, very much appreciated. Dankeschön. Yeah, the power brakes are to be avoided, Rosewood Steel. No power brakes. They're garbage. They desolder themselves. They weren't designed for heat. Hey, sent to me, got a Fender 65 Deluxe Reverb. It buzzes hum when the volume is turned up with no guitar plugged in. Ideas, lead dress. Well, you're going to have some buzz and hum when the volume is turned up with no guitar plugged in. But the question is how much. You could have a bad solder joint. You could have loose hardware. You could have a jack which is not normaling properly, by which I mean, well, I'll show you. I can't show you, but I can demonstrate what it would sound like. I'm going to go over to this bassman that's on the bench, and I'm going to have the volume up with no guitar plugged in, and then I'm going to open the normaling on the input jack so the input is no longer tied to ground, and you tell me if that's the noise that you're hearing. I have unplugged the cable. I have the volume pot on 3. I'm going to push open the jack so it's not normal to ground. Did you hear that? I'm going to turn it up. So here it's normal. There it's not. Is that the kind of thing you're hearing? Because those switches on the PCB, on the Jackson PCB, can get dirty, and that won't happen. Or sometimes they wear out, but that may not be the sound you're describing. But if it's a lot louder than that, you probably have a ground issue. And there's a video I've got up showing things that for Fender reissues. It's in the Fender reissues playlist. Things owners can do themselves to make their amps work better, and a lot of that is tightening everything up. I'll invite Ohm. We're not going there, okay? Okay. I'm not sure how much difference it makes on the heater. If it fits physically within the eyelets of the tube socket pins, and the wire is not causing so much strain on the connections that it's mechanically a problem, you're fine. But I thought metric and US were equivalent when it came to wire gauge. I thought they'd standardize that, at least nominally. I mean, there's always a range of things. 18 is never precisely this diameter or whatever. 20 is never precisely this diameter. It's within a plus minus. How long do Mallory caps on the power supply last? Average? No caps. No. Well, electrolytic capacitors, or what you're talking about on the power supply, electrolytic capacitors are designed to last 10 to 15 years. They're not designed to last 50 plus years. If you want to use a cap in the power supply that can last 50 plus years, you want to use a film cap. And I showed that in the car Skylark video a couple weeks ago with the great big Solon film caps that are very expensive, very large, and by the time you get to the values you might use in, say, a Marshall, they're very, very expensive, very, very large, or you'd have to use multiple 20s in parallel to get the equivalent value. Most people would rather just, hey, I'm going to go with the smaller, less expensive part that I have to change every 20 years versus the thing that can last a really long time that's very expensive and very large. It's just real estate is at a premium in these things. Rubicon Heart of Muse. I don't know that one. Is that a different? Is that a novel? Sorry, I make a Apocalypse Now joke, but it's too much of a stretch. How problematic is a transformer that leaked a little wax in a JMI Vox? Does that mean the transformer is bad or unreliable? It usually means that it's a power transformer in a JMI era Vox because those things were potted with wax, and those things get hot, and over time that wax melts a little bit. I have seen very few JMIs in the United States where a little bit of wax has not come out of it, but I've had none that were bad as a result. So I imagine that you're going to be just fine and don't worry about it. Magisterium, it does make sense. It comes from lead shot. How many, in terms of, it gets complicated, but yeah, it makes sense, but it's not intuitive to how we think about it. I would not trust a Weber Minimass. I'm glad yours worked for you, Emery Train, but they are not built well inside. Tor bought an Amplified Nation Phoenix Fury. Well, I hope it's fantastic. I've not seen inside one of those yet. Jim Gansman bought a Eminence Alessandro 64, thinking the Celestion had a rub. The sound must be from the Princeton amp, not voice coil rub. I may need the speaker for my deluxe reverb sometime. Well, they're both good. It's going to be a good speaker for all kinds of things. But if you have problems with sound in a Princeton, first of all, always test it with an external cabinet whenever possible. It's likely you've got bad 6v6s. 6v6s in a combo that are problematic, you'll hear it. Jim, you probably are a pair of tubes or a tech visit away from having a fantastic amp. Hey, Kevin, how is a 66 barn find coming along? Looking forward to videos. Where am I on that? I did some work on that. Where are we? Oh, that's the one. Yeah, okay, yeah, I forgot. That's one where the power transformer died because of the 30 amp fuse. Well, I don't know that it was because of the 30 amp fuse, but it's pretty fucking likely, as I pointed out. So I ordered the new transformer 3-4 days ago. It may be here today, maybe here Monday. We'll find out. Put this to the side. I don't want to put this just anywhere. But, I'm just one power transformer away. It's a shame to have to replace a transformer, but 30 amp fuses. For those of you who don't know, the correct fuse for a Princeton Reverb is 1 amp. If that thing draws more than 1 amp of current, it should shut off. 30 amp gives no protection at all. You're relying on the circuit breakers in your house, 10, 15, 20 amp circuit breakers. And I appreciate the Jameson. I'm not going to be bringing the pedals back unless some company reaches out and wants to license the design. So if you really want them, you reach out to Keeley or name a pedal company and say, hey, you guys need to license this. I'd be glad to talk to someone about it. Just say, hey, I want to sit back and quietly make money off my design if the build quality were maintained, if the sound and build quality were maintained with some other company. I'd love to do it, but I can't afford to set that thing up. I can't afford to set up a factory and have people. I can't afford minions. No minions for me. So, and they take too long to build. I would lose money building them all myself these days. I lost money building them then too, which is why that venture did not work. You can build the world's best XYZ, but it doesn't mean you can make a dime doing it. Am I following any of Chris's videos at Rift Amps? I'm aware of Chris. I've checked a few of his videos. I tend not to watch amp videos that much. I check in on Brad, and I check in on Jay's occasionally, and I check in on Frank, mostly because I think Frank and Brad are funny, and Jay's has got his toes in a more high gain world than I do. I like to keep one foot in that world. So yeah, hey Jeff, I do watch Jason Tong Headfirst Amps a couple times a month. I watch Frank at Forgotten Gear Restorations quite a bit. A couple other people I keep an eye out on, up and comers, and I like to watch Brad's stuff because I like Brad. And then it makes me feel better watching him suffer through the same kind of amps that I've suffered through. It's not the nicest of impulses, maybe, but it's understandable and very human to enjoy someone else's suffering. But if I'm on YouTube for myself, I'm not looking at amps. I rarely look at my own stuff. Jeff McErlane, I watch his videos. Hey, Guitar Builder, thanks for joining us. Yeah, if you guys don't know Jeff McErlane, check him out. He does fantastic videos on how to be a musician. I tell you how to make noise or not electrocute yourself, or electrocute yourself if that's your choice. He tells you how to make it sound good. What you do with one of these boxes. So check him out if you don't know Jeff. You should. So I watch stuff like that, and I watch stuff like documentaries on the Apollo 11 program and documentaries on the 100 Years' War, and I just watched a 3-hour documentary series on the rise of the ancient Khmer empire at Angkor Wat, because I don't know enough about Cambodia in my life. The West has a certain bias, and I'm like trying to fill it in. I'll learn about Cambodia, learn about India and the Indus Valley civilization, learn about the kingdoms of Africa, things that in our whole Greco-Roman Western push have gotten glossed over. And I need to know more about these things. I only have so much time on this planet. I want to know more about the rock before I leave. That's not a bad choice, Richard. The Power Break and the Weber do not have good reputations with techs. They have good reputations with players and people in forums and guitar magazines, but techs don't think very highly of them, and we have terrible things to say about them behind you guys' backs. I'd share them, but this is a family show. Of course not, Rocky. This is a family show. Oh, almost spilled my drink everywhere, but I did not. I have a 73 Princeton that's very low in volume compared to my 68 Drip Edge Princeton Reverb. Any mods I can recommend for more volume? If your 73 Princeton is a non-reverb Princeton, it will not have the volume of the Princeton Reverb. Princeton Reverb has got more gain than a non-reverb Princeton. If they are both Princeton Reverbs, then I cannot tell you. I can fix it for you, but there's so many variables as far as plate voltage, all the things. They should sound pretty much the same 73 and 68, unless your 73 is a non-reverb, in which case it's not going to have the gain of the 68, which means that a jazz guy would love it. Are there cab speakers that are well suited for both bass and guitar, or would it be better to have a cab for each? Depends on what sound you're trying to get. As far as playing live, for most bass concepts, no. As far as recording, for what people want a speaker for a bass guitar on a record to be, yeah, absolutely, because you can get everything else from a direct sound, and you can just bring in some air and upper mids, and you can use a twin reverb for that. My shop cab 2x12, even though it's an open back, works fine for adding that color that you get from a mic'd bass amp. But most modern bass is direct or direct blended with a little bit of mic'd bass amp. Stage use, no, forget about it. You're not going to have the fundamental. You're not going to have the focused secondary. Like a 4x10 bass cab with a 5-string doesn't have a fundamental, but that first octave is what you're really hearing, and our ears fill in the gap. So the different roles, and a 45-watt Bassman sounds fantastic for bass, but it doesn't sound. It's not a fantastic live bass amp because you really need to be like 300 watts to hang with a 50-watt guitar amp. Anyway, that's why you need to have one of everything or two of everything. Anyway, I meant to say about Chris at Rift Amps. He does great work. I just don't watch a lot of amp videos on here, but Chris does fantastic stuff. What would be a good solder sucker tool for relatively novice tinker for periodic? Okay, just the glare. The glare. Engineer SS03, SS-03. Amazon, $25-$30. All the cheap ones, all the $10 ones suck. All the big blue ones suck. They all clog. They all fail. They have to be replaced again and again and again. Spend $25-$30. It comes with replacement tubing. Each little section of tubing lasts me about a month. It doesn't clog. It works. It's very effective, and there's no big recoil. And it looks cool. The big blue and yellow one is also crappy. Sorry, Zapruder. It's more expensive, crappy with a lot of recoil. Best Fender authorized repair shop in Nashville or St. Louis, Louisville, less than 3 hours from southern Indiana. I don't know. I'm not a fan. What's the best way to put this? I would not ever agree to be a Fender authorized repair service center because they're not going to pay jack shit, and they're going to argue with everything that you think an amp needs to be done. They're going to nickel and dime you and try to always do the least amount of work and pay on 90-day cycles and all that nonsense. So when I find a shop is a Fender authorized repair service, it gives me pause. I've declined to be a repair service for some companies. I'll just say that. But I don't know. Contact a dealer in any of those cities because the dealer in that city is going to only be able to send Fenders that they sell to the local authorized repair shop. And so I don't know if there is a best authorized repair shop. I can tell you the best techs, but I can't tell you the best authorized techs because most of the best techs are too busy to deal with Fender's nonsense. What are my thoughts on the bias probes you put in between the power tube and tube socket for bias measurements? I think they're fantastic for an owner. They're not extraordinarily accurate, but they do keep you safe. I think they're going to cause most players to err on the side of safety, whether they know it or not. I don't think there's any problem using them as long as you use them correctly. If you're getting into this, read the instructions 8 times before you do it and reread as you go. Thanks, Swamp Donkey. Appreciate that. I have not had any problem with the silicone tip getting plugged up with solder, but I keep this. I've got this silicone cut about 1.5 millimeters past past the entrance, so I don't have a big long barrel of silicone here. Like 1.5, 2 millimeters is all I've got, and so I'm not getting clogs, and it pushes past that. I could see that if I had this like half an inch or so, it's like 5, 7 millimeters out, I could get clogs. So the trick for me, let's see if you can see this. I always forget where to put it. Can you see that? I don't have a lot of distance there, which also gives me better suction. That's what someone said. On that lovely note, we're going to go to intermission for the next 7-minute intermission a little bit early because I need to use a special room in the house. Not the new special room, the old special room. The new special room is still happening. I'm about to tear out the old ceiling. That'll be fun. See you guys in 7 minutes. All righty. Oops, wrong question, wrong button. That's from last week. Coming back a little bit early. Apparently there's my time, and it takes 8 seconds before my time becomes your time. So that's not bad lag. Let's see, where were we? Five do's and don'ts for shipping apps. Don't use packing peanuts. Don't use packing peanuts. Don't use packing peanuts. Don't have it packed at a FedEx or UPS or the post office. Use an independent mailing shipping company. Have them make a box. Have them cut foam panels if necessary. And don't use packing peanuts. Heavy amounts of bubble wrap wrapped around. This is more than 5 because I want to make the point of don't use packing peanuts. If you have a whole bunch of bubble wrap, don't have them use regular packing tape to seal the bubble wrap, because then when I get the imp and I try to undo the bubble wrap, it all gets torn up. Bring a roll of painter's tape or regular masking tape. Close up the bubble wrap with that so that it can be unpeeled and reused, because it's a waste of bubble wrap to get it all torn up trying to get all the tape off. And it's in a box. It's not, those joints aren't going to be that stressed. You don't have to permanently seal the bubble wrap. Just blue painter's tape will be fine. And a heavy duty box. And don't ship the tubes in the chassis, if shipping just the chassis. Lifted the signal inputs at the 220K mixed resistors. Hiss gone. V4 swap twice. Okay, it's out of sequence. All right. In my 64 Deluxe, I've got more hiss than I expect and narrow it down to a small part of the circuit. V1, V2 removed, still there. Grid to V4B lifted, noise still there. Well, you have to have a grid to V4B. You have to have a grid connection, otherwise that tube won't bias. So lifted the signal inputs at the mixed resistors, gone. All right. A couple of things it can be. You can have bad 220K mixed resistors. You can have DC leaking into those 220K mixed resistors from the adjacent points in the cathode of the phase inverter, where there's 50 to 90 volts there. You want to make sure that you don't have any DC on the board there. You want to make sure that you don't have any DC present at the grid of V4B. And that usually comes from the point on V2B, where you have the 100K plate resistor. And so here's looking at it from your perspective, you have the 100K plate resistor, here's the B plus node, here's the plate connection. It's a 22 or 20 nanofarad cap and a 500 picofarad cap. And there's a wire here at this eyelet which goes to the 3.3 meg resistor in parallel with the 10 picofarad. And that eyelet, where the 20 or 22 nanofarad cap junction is with the 500 picofarad and the wire going off, that's like a quarter inch or less from that B plus node, and DC builds up there. I've shown that a lot. You've got to make sure there's no DC present there, because if that DC is there, you're going to have noise on your grid to V4B. It's really a matter of just cleaning it all out and getting all the DC out with isopropyl alcohol and heat. Why are magnetone amps so expensive? Daniel Mincher asks. Well, they're really well built. They're complicated circuits. The ones which have tremolo use a varistor that no one makes anymore, that Magnetone has made to their spec. So when you have a custom thing made in small quantities, the price goes up, and because they can, the market will meet that price. So if they're getting what they ask for, they're going to ask for that much. It is perceived quality, the actual quality, and then in this case, I'll say that the perceived quality doesn't quite match the actual quality, but the actual quality is very, very good. And so in a world where the quality of a lot of amps these days is going down and Magnetone is quite good, it's fine. Steve Nim says, I own a Freeman Runt 20 head and just didn't vibe with it as much as a Marshall SC 20 head. And a recommendation on upgrades I can make to the 20H down the road? Well, no. The 20 SC 20 head is garbage, overpriced garbage. Don't make any changes to it. Contact Dave Friedman and say, hey, these are the things I like about the Marshall SC, and see if he says, oh, you'd like the little sister, or send me, if you still have the runts, send it to me. I'll tweak it to make it more like you're looking for. Friedman's got like 10 variations on what Marshall was doing between 67 and 78, basically, 83, basically, and then the modded stuff beyond that. So start with quality and have it voiced to be what you want it to be. Dave or I or any good tech could take a Freeman Runt 20 and make it sound like any variant of a Marshall that you ever dreamed of, and it would last. Whereas the SC20, you might like the sound of it, but it's not going to work very long. It's not going to last. It's very poorly built and priced 3 times higher than any of the construction justifies. I can't lie to you and say, oh, do this. I could have taken that and said, hey, you send that to me, and for $800, I will make that thing fantastic. I can't. That'd be lying to you. Or $200, whatever the price is. It'd be false advertising because the core amplifier is not worth putting any money into. The Danocaster, Nachocaster stuff is so annoying. How is that annoying? Those are fantastic guitars. Did I miss something up above? Are Telecaster enthusiasts the most annoying subgroup of guitarists? No. But I won't say what is. But the Danocaster and Nachocaster are phenomenal guitars. Rob French agrees with my recommendation on the on Halford loudspeakers. Dave does a great job, and he doesn't overprice. He doesn't overcharge. And it's only recently that in the last year or so with my videos that he's been getting a lot of guitar speakers. Usually he's getting hi-fi stuff, but he knows how to do the same work on guitar speakers and gets the correct components. So he's been slept upon by the guitar community. He's a great resource, and as a result, he doesn't price gouge. CTS pots seem to have lost the recipe in terms of taper. Seems not many good J taper options replace. Something about using 1 meg linear with 500K R from wiper to ground to emulate J taper. Well, it won't, because then when the pot's turned up, you're going to lose a lot of low end, and the taper really won't be good. CTS hasn't lost the recipe. CTS is trying to make as many different, suit as many niches in the market with one component. And so their switch pot uses the same track as their non-switch pot, which means that below 9 o'clock there's nothing, and then all of a sudden it comes on. But they do make a J-taper pot, which is quite good. And they make a pot from Mojotone, which Mojotone specs out as vintage taper, which is a 20% taper, close to J-taper 30%, which is great for the 250K. And Mojotone is making 250K and 500K. I don't think Daniel C. I will make sure I get to your question. They don't make a 1 meg vintage taper, as far as I know, because it's expensive to have CTS make custom pots for your spec the way Mojotone does. Fender also has CTS make a 250K J taper and a 1 meg J taper. They're out of stock right now at CE, but they usually stock them. But they're $7 a pot versus about $3.50 a pot for the CE labeled J taper. But CE does make a J taper. The trouble with the CE J taper, not CE, CTS J taper that they sell at CE distribution, is that the bushing length is very long. And so you've got to use 2 or 3 tooth washers to make them sit the same way a standard pot does. It's all kinds of fun stuff behind the scenes or behind the panel. But yeah, the standard CTS audio taper pot, they're using that same pot, that same track, the carbon track, for their switch pots where there's supposed to be a dead zone below 8 o'clock. So it's not fun. Hey, Alex241. I played an Eric Johnson Strat for the first time and loved the chunky neck. Most comfortable Fender neck I've ever played. Is it thicker than the 50s reissue Strat neck? It is thicker than the standard production 50s reissue Strat necks, and it's not a V like most of the standard production 50s reissue Strat necks. Now, there are custom shop 50s necks, lots of different profiles that they do, some of which are thicker than the Eric Johnson. But the Eric Johnson of the production models is about as thick as they come while still being a C, with just maybe the slightest whiff of almost being a V at some points. Not very much, though. Mercurio DOB, Friedman Little Sister 20-watt combo, good option for clean headroom amp to gig and clubs? I don't know. I've not tried the 20-watt version of the Little Sister. For a clean headroom amp, I'm not sure that, I'm not sure. I know that clean headroom is not what Dave's going for on that, though he does have some nice clean sounding channels on his amps. I think his 50 watts have more clean options than the 20. The 20 tends to be more towards the dirty side of thing. It depends on what your clean is. I would typically send someone towards a deluxe reverb or an AC15 or AC30 for what you're describing, and then pair that with maybe a Little Sister set to a Marshall-y sound, a little bit more of an overdriven sound. But you can get one person's clean as another person's dirty. There's a lot of overlap. Alex says that Fender lists the Eric Johnson neck as a soft V. I've been playing it for 20 years, but mine's first year production. Maybe they've changed it. The first year, almost no V to it at all. Just the slightest hint of it might be in the immediate future down towards the first 3 frets. But I've not played one of the current production ones. Maybe they changed it. With a single channel multi-input high-low tube, is it safe to use an ABY box to switch between inputs without having to disconnect, reconnect? Is it safe? Yes. Will it work the way you want? No. The high gain input of most tube amps, as far as like a standard Marshall Fender Vox wiring, when you're in the high gain, the low gain input is being used internally. That's how the switching works. And if you use an ABY pedal to go into the high and low at the same time, you're not going to actually get the same benefit of either. In fact, it could be very, very wrong, depending on what the wiring in your ABY pedal is doing. It'd be safe, but it wouldn't give you the benefit. And then when you get into like the JCM 800, 2203, 2204 high-low gain stuff, if you're plugging something in the low gain input, you don't have a high gain path for the signal to take. So safe, yeah. Useful, not very. I would also say that on most amps with high-low gain, if you want the sound of the low gain input, turn your volume on your guitar down to 7. You're there. Play softer. Turn your volume. Use your volume pot. You don't need an AB box for that. ABY box for that. Let's see. Interesting problem in my first 5E3 build. Cuts out and gets raspy distorted after 15 minutes of playing. Sounds great until it doesn't. I'm guessing cold solder joint or underboard wires. Could be biased very incorrectly. Could be a lot of things. I don't mean to be negative, but you might want to take your build to a tech and have them look through it, because what might take you 6 months to find might take an actual tech 10 minutes. And you might learn, if you're not careful, you might learn something. That's one of the only Cosby quotes which still holds up, which makes me sad. Hey, guitar builder. Who would love to hear my preferences on tone volume pots, treble bleeds, and capacitors, or anything else on the electronics side. Well, it depends on what the guitarist is doing, but for the average rock, country, blues, metal player, you choose the resistance of the pot based on the pickups. So typically 250K single coil, 500K humbuckers. I like an audio taper or a J taper, which is a 20 to 30% taper for volume and tone. For certain styles, linear can be okay for volume if you don't want to have if you're not going to be playing with amp overdrive. It's always clean and you just want a quick responsive change, say for like comping to soloing into a clean amp, then linear volume can be nice. Should always be an audio taper volume. Otherwise, it should always be an audio taper tone circuit or a J taper tone circuit, never linear for tone. Otherwise, all the change is bunched between 0 and 1. I'm not a big fan of treble bleeds. It is possible to get them to be usable, but most of them are painful. And I much prefer to do what's called 50s wiring, which is where you hang the tone circuit off the wiper of the volume pot rather than the input of the volume pot. So as you turn the volume pot down, you have serious resistance between the pickup and the load of the tone circuit. And so you don't lose that high end from just having the tone circuit put a load on the pickup directly. And as far as capacitors go, use your ears as to whether you like a 100 nanofarad, 47 nanofarad, 22 nanofarad, 15 nanofarad, 10 nanofarad, 5 nanofarad, whatever. As far as the type of capacitor, it makes absolutely no difference in a guitar circuit. I tend to use the same capacitors that I use for guitars because I have a ton. The same capacitors I use for amps because I have a ton of them. So they tend to be 400 volts to 630 volts because that's what I buy for for amp use. But if I were just buying a capacitor to put into a guitar, I probably use something 50 to 63 volts. Not that there's anywhere close to 50 to 63 volts inside a guitar, but I know that the lead will be strong enough to hold up. Whereas if I used a 10 volt cap, the leads might be too flimsy mechanically. That's about it. And I'm a big believer in proper shielding. What do I think about the Neo Creamback and the Celestion Heritage G1265? You say G1365? I don't know the Heritage G1365. I thought the Neo Creamback sounded good, but very bright in comparison to a real Creamback, but good. It wouldn't be my choice as far as sound goes, but if I had a really bad back or could not carry an amp otherwise, I would come to accept that tonal sacrifice for the ability to play at all. I think of the Neos I've tried, the Creamback is the best sounding one I've tried, but they all tend to be very bright. Except for the Neo 12K, which the Neo what is it called? The C12K, the Neo version of that sounds just like a regular C12K, which means it sounds terrible. Hey, Milo316, I love the video on the Marshall with the 6550s. I looked at the data sheet on those tubes and it gave voltages for triode connection. Can you explain what that is? Yeah, 6550 is a pentode, a 6L6, a 6V6, an EL34. Almost every power tube that you're using is a pentode. An EL84 is a pentode. They can be run in triode mode. In triode mode, you connect the screen and the plate grids. The plate to the screen grid, which forces the tube to work in triode mode. You have less voltage, you have less wattage, the less output. I don't like the sound of most pentodes run in triode mode, but it can be done. A lot of companies will do that as a half power mode. It can introduce all kinds of noise into an amp when you do that, depending on the ripple which is present on the reservoir cap, the first node in the filtering stage. I don't find it to be particularly useful, but people like to do it. It's a cheap and dirty way to have a half-power mode. Though with that cheap and dirty comes reliability issues as you're switching high voltage across DC with a switch designed only for AC. But the data sheets for most tubes give typical voltages and current limits for triode mode and pentode mode, and you can look at them as Class A, Class AB. The more detailed data sheets will show you different modes of operations. I tend to look and see, okay, what is the max DC acceptable the acceptable level for the plate and the screen? What is the max wattage this tube can provide? So a 6550 is a 42 watt tube. A 6L6 is a 30 watt tube. A EL34 is a 25 watt tube. A traditional 6V6 is 12.3 watts, and a traditional EL84 is like 7 watts. 12 watts. Sorry, 12 watts. Sorry, I was thinking of fixed bias. 12 watts. So I keep those variables in my mind. But if I get a weird tube, I'm like, okay, I think I can only take 310 volts on the grid, and this amp's got 480 volts on the screen grid. I'm like, okay, they didn't do this right. I gotta respect the data sheet. But I almost never ever run anything in triode mode. AP530 says, I've had a Hot Rod Deluxe for years. I'm looking to do mods repairs. Switch speaker to Eminence Man of War and use Ampus pedal platform. After repairs, will this amp be a keeper? After the repairs, most of which are reliability upgrades, the amp should work for a much longer period of time. I cannot tell you how long, but I can tell you that once the filter caps aren't going to arc and burn the boards and leak everywhere, and once the 5-volt components in the low voltage supply are not cooking the board, once the faulty plate resistors in the phase inverter have been changed out, and the screen grid resistors have been upgraded, and sometimes the solder joints reflowed on the output tube sockets, the inherent problems of that amp are kind of pushed way to the background, and the amp is likely to last 20 plus years. Know, however, that the stock input jack is still a weak link. I often replace those with Switchcrafts. And all the pots, maybe every 5 years, probably should be the board should be pulled out and all those solder connections inspected, because it's not a ruggedly made amp. But if you love the sound and it works musically for you, there's no reason you can't get 20 plus years out of it after those mods are done. And those mods aren't trying to make the amp sound better. They're trying to make it last. Fender should have built it that way from the get-go. Mr. Anderson, that's my middle name. Intermittent, scratchy, static Velcro noise coming from 65 Deluxe Reverb issue. Tried all inputs, same on both channels, bad tubes perhaps, or something else. I would start by rolling different preamp tubes. So if you look at the back of the amp, from right to left, there are 6 preamp tubes. I would start by pulling all but the first and the 6th one. So you're going to have the one on the far right and the one right next to the large tubes, which are the 6V6s. And that'll only give you a normal channel. You won't have any reverb channel whatsoever. Do you have noise just with the normal channel? Yes. Change out then you have 2 tubes. You change out one for 12AX7 for a different 12AX7. Change the 12AT7 for a different 12AT7. If the noise is still there, you have a problem inside the amp. If you don't have a problem, it was the tube, then you add in the 2nd tube from the right and the 4th tube from the right, and that gives you your reverb channel without reverb. Do you have noise when you put those tubes in? Yes. Okay, change those tubes. Does the noise go away? Yes. Do you have bad tubes? No. You have a problem inside the amp. So that's the starting point, but I can't tell you beyond that. It could be all kinds of things from that point. But if it's just one or two bad tubes, you can sort that out yourself. And remember, you can also say, all right, I don't need to test the reverb function or the tremolo function. And if it was quiet on the normal channel, I can take the tube that was in V1, the one on the right, put it in V2, the one right next to it. That's the tube for the reverb channel, vibrato channel. Then you just put one in V4, and then you're reducing the number of variables, so it's easier to troubleshoot. Hey, Natas, how long will it take to damage the super reverb when powering amp with no speaker connected? It took about a minute before I realized why I wasn't hearing the guitar. No issues at the moment. Well, you're probably just fine. Remember, the Fender output jack is shunted to ground. When no speaker is plugged in, it has the world's largest load. Your output transformer is loaded to ground, so it really does protect. You would have to run everything dimed on that amp and play for hours with no speaker connected before you might do some damage in that situation. The issue with the damaging output on a traditional Fender is more that you plug in the cab connection at the back of the amp, but it becomes unplugged from the speaker cab or from the speaker, or a speaker fails, because that defeats that safety ground connection of the jack. With other amps, most Marshalls, most other amps, that don't ground out, they don't normal to ground the speaker connection, and you power the amp up without a speaker connected, that's when you'd have a problem. The Fender is actually helping you out, and you probably dodged all kinds of bullets there. So congratulations. It's like Leo knew what he was doing. Have I ever seen a tube chart shrink in a Fender Tweed that's been lacquered? I have a weird 58, wondering if the cab is original, looking new on outside but old inside, and shrunk tube chart. Chris, I don't know. I've not time traveled to 1958 to see them apply the lacquer. I assume that they lacquered the cab before they put the tube chart on the inside. But I would have to have the amp in front of me to play Originality Sleuth for you. That's odd if it looks new on the outside. Maybe it was retolexed and relacquered. I don't know. And Emery Train has a good point. Yeah, if you have the two Princetons and different volume levels, make sure it's not just a bad speaker in one of them. Is there any trick in making these Marshall clones sound as good as the real ones? I don't know what these Marshall clones are, and not all the real ones sound good, so it depends on what you're talking about. Victor almost went to Angkor Wat back in '75 when you lived in Bangkok. I'd love to hear about that sometime, Victor. I found out the area had landmines. Yeah, Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot, not nice people. Did Cambodia and Cambodians no favors. I know that they're still removing landmines from all over Cambodia, and just an awful thing to have to deal with. They're still removing landmines and undetonated ordnance from the fields in Belgium and France from World War I, because that stuff, it stays deadly 100 years later now, 110 years later. It's every year someone dies from World War I and World War II bombs in fields. And I'm sure that's happening all over Cambodia and Vietnam and Laos. Is a 60-watt Weller soldering station good enough to solder a ground wire to a steel Fender chassis? No. I use an 80-watt dedicated iron for that stuff. I've got a very powerful Hakko variable temperature controlled soldering station. I don't use it for chassis stuff. I use this 80-watt Weller that's just plug and play. All the heat goes to this. I need to tighten it up. It's a little bit loose, but other than that, this is a tool for the chassis, and that's a tool for everything else. I think it was like $80 and pays for itself as soon as you use it. Let's see. I do wish the engineer was longer, but if it was longer, it might not eject the solder as much. They may have tried and said, that's as much as we can reliably every time eject after taking it in. It's easy enough to work with. I'll just, if I have hit a joint 3 times, I hit a joint 3 times. This is a family show. Hey, Chris Chris Quinn, I'll ask again. Well, I've only seen it the first time. Should I replace all the black and red Astrons in my 5960 Ampeg rocket? Recommendations for replacements? Absolutely, you should. All the yellow and red Astrons are garbage. You might luck out and have, if you've got 12 capacitors, one or two might be okay, but most of them have failed or are failing or will fail next week. They're just bad caps. Recommendation for replacements: you can go get red Jupiters if you want them to be red and pay $7 to $15 each. You can use Mallory 150Ms or Vishay MKT 1813s and save a lot of money. They're going to sound much better than the Astrons ever did, and the Apples sound great. With an Ampeg rocket from that era, you might want to look at some of the ground scheme in there. Sometimes those things have some ground issues as well, but those Astrons need to go, Chris. Mark, I hope you're okay. Double neck surgery sounds terrible. I hope you come back here next time and you tell us you're fine, man. Pastor, 325 secondary HT power transformer 6G3. Assume somewhere the 300 is better. Well, you can. In a perfect world, you could snap your fingers and try each. Both will be fine. They have different characteristics. Let's see. With a GZ34, so let's take 10 off this. Let's do a bit of calculation. So, all right, 325 times 1.42. Hit the wrong button. Okay. 325 times 1.42. These are quick and dirties. Minus 10. It's going to put you at 451 max B plus. 300 times 1.42 minus 10. 416. So 450 to 416 is the range between those two. Well, what happens if we do the 325 times 1.42 minus 30? 431. That would be what happened if you use the 325 with a 5U4 instead of a GZ34. So you have a choice of 450, 431, and 420 basically. And they're all going to have slightly different sounds. None of them are wrong. None of them are better. I imagine, given what you're looking for in a 6G3, you probably like the lower voltage better because you're going to have more compression. But some guys are going to wish they had a little more clean headroom because that amp already doesn't have much. And I don't think that that 30-volt difference in B plus is going to be the make or break. But you might find one just as magically delicious. So, and that 1.42 is just a really quick and dirty calculation for the AC after rectification. And that actually depends on what the actual filtering is. Your capacitance will affect that. And in the case of a GZ34 versus, the first number that comes out of the calculator, 1.42, is a little bit higher than the actual B plus would be with a solid state rectification, even aside from the voltage drop that the solid state diode gives you. And then you factor in roughly 10 volts drop on a GZ34 versus 30 volts drop roughly on a 5U4. You can kind of to back of the napkin estimates to see what you're looking at. So I can make the output of this go from 460 to 410 just by varying the bias on this baseband. So nothing's in a vacuum except your tubes, hopefully. I have a Hammond reverb unit out of an organ. I'd like to make it a reverb for guitar. Well, I'm not familiar with that circuit. It would depend on the impedance drive. You could probably make it happen. I don't know. I mean, I know it's doable. I don't know how problematic it would be. Let's see. Thanks, Martin Reed. He's telling me thank you for doing these. No DC on the WC. Yeah, Pastor Bentone. Neruda Lobos, any recommendations for getting a book on getting started with electronics? Go to valvewizard.co.uk. Read the stuff he has up on his website. If that all makes sense to you, and read the full PDF first chapter of a book he's got up there on how preamps work. If that interests you and you're following along, he's got a book you can order. That'd be a great place to start. A lot of other books start with the math and with the more technical. Merlin, the guy who runs and writes all that stuff at valvewizard.co.uk, communicates to humans very well, which is a rare ability for those blessed with the higher maths. Hey, Mike L's got a basement reissue. Plan on replacing the solid-state rectifier for a tube rectifier. Plan on replacing the transformer. The transformer doesn't need replaced unless it's faulty. Are there any other upgrades you recommend? I've got a video 6 months, a year ago, of a 59 LTD reissue where I made it right, and I compared it to the 58 basement right next to it, and it was very, very, very similar to the actual 58. One of the big changes is they have two 20 microfarad filter caps in parallel in the preamp of at least the LTD, and that really makes that thing stiff. And I changed all the values to those of the 58 through 60 basement. But look at those videos because I go into detail on what I did and why. Tube rectifier, good. Transformer, not necessary unless yours is faulty. The one that's in there should be good. Recently acquired a 69 Fender Deluxe Reverb. Notice one of the transformer bolts is broken off. Everything else is tight, solid. How should I replace that bolt? How? Well, it's tricky because they're lacquered in place, and that lacquer is down. If here's the tube that the bolt passes through the transformer, it's not like that bolt sitting in a hollow tube. It's almost touching the opening of the transformer, and it's got lacquer in there. So what you can do, make sure you take the nut or a Kep's nut off the inside of the chassis. And hopefully you've got some of it sticking up. It's not sheared off right at the level of the chassis. If it is, you can still get around it. You want to use a sharp scalpel or utility knife to cut the lacquer around from the head of the bolt where it's on the top of the bell for the transformer. And you probably want to get a chassis iron and heat the head of that bolt up. Then from when it's hot, get a nail set it on that screw, the bolt coming from the other side, and a hammer, and just tap, 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 tap. You're not trying to smash the thing. You're trying to tap, tap, tap so that the shock breaks the shellac, which is in the lacquer, which is in that hole holding the screw in place. And between heat and the tapping and crossing your fingers, it should come through. Someone's at the door. I'll be right back. Just a second. Sorry, guys. The little girl next door, her frisbee went over the fence in the entire backyard, and so we had a situation. But I was on it. Frisbee removal, no charge. Let's see. Anyway, basically, you got to between a little bit of tap, mechanical stress, targeted, and heating up the bolt. Hopefully, you'll loosen up that lacquer, and the whole thing can be replaced. It's just an 8x32 bolt, 3-4 inches long. Once you do that, you can put almost any suitable bolt in. You want to have a pan head, of course, if not a, what do they call the one that's larger than a pan head? I can't remember. Anyway, you can take the old one to the hardware store and match it. Thank you very much, Daniel C. Let me get to your question here. He's got a Greg Germino Lead 55, great amp. The clean channel sounds glorious at any volume, but the gain channel doesn't shine until it's cranked. I've tried pedals and attenuation, but it doesn't sound as good. I don't have master volume, but would adding one hurt the clean channel? I know it should solve the gain channel, but I don't want to lose that glorious clean channel tone. It won't hurt the clean channel. But anytime you attenuate, if you attenuate too much, you're going to lose some physical interaction and pick up the speaker interaction and all that. And I would contact Greg. Remember that gain channel on a Lead 55 is supposed to be a relatively low gain channel. That's what they do. He might recommend some other attenuator than you've tried. He might say, send the amp to me, I'll put a master volume in, you'll be very happy. But give Greg a chance to answer. Worst comes to worst, I'd be glad to send me an email, and I'd be glad to talk to you. If Greg can't make you 100% happy, I'd be glad to look at that amp for you, because that's a really nice amp. And part of looking at that amp would be like to say, well, this is a really great amp, and you're a good player, but you have the wrong amp, and this amp does not need to be modded. This amp needs to be in the hands of someone for whom it's right, and this is more the amp for you. I don't know, but I'm always cautious about telling people, oh, this amp needs to have all these things changed about it. Sometimes amps need to have things changed. Sometimes you just have the wrong amp. Like, I wish someone had told me a long time ago, you have the wrong first wife. Let's see. I have not seen the guts of the new Vox hand-wired series. I'd have to see them in person to really have an opinion. I saw NAMM 2-3 years ago. They had a one that was all black, but I think that was just built for NAMM. I'm trying to decide between a 63 AC36 non-top boost, 63 AC10 twin, completely rebuilt with replaced transformers and new speakers, or a 64 AC10 twin, mostly original. Any advice is appreciated. Well, Bottom Kitchen, I'm trying to decide between Ginger and Marianne, because that's that kind of a problem. If you need it to be louder, the AC30 is going to be louder than either AC10. Certainly. I don't know what the price difference between the 63 and 64 AC10s are, and I don't know what the condition of any of them or what they sell or what they sound like. So I think if you're talking about the kind of money that's involved with any of those three, you should hear them in person before making a decision. And if this is just for home use, you can be happy with all three. If you're looking live, for live use, the AC30 is going to kill the AC10 for live use, unless you're only ever playing at high volume stuff. I'd have to see specific photos of the specific amps to give you more advice. If there's anything that's a red flag, I can't tell from what you said. Thanks, Alex241. Mike L. just got a bass reissue. Yeah, okay. We thank you for the super chat, Mike. Again, To everyone who has not been here a lot, I appreciate the super chat Mike just gave me, but he asked the question the first time, and then he thought wasn't going to answer it. And he did the super chat. I already answered his question. I appreciate the super chat, but you don't have to do a super chat to get an answer. The only thing a super chat does is guarantee that I will answer your question before the end of the chat. But I try to answer all the questions I can in any live stream. The super chats are appreciated. They are not mandatory, and I'm not trying to say, I'll wait till someone pays me to answer that one. Yes, John Hogg, if you have your pedal board set up so you've got certain pedals going to A, certain pedals going into B, top boost to normal, and you don't have any polarity or ground loop issues, yes, you can do that absolutely. No problem whatsoever. Let's see. Yeah, I think I went with the 5U4 yeah, I did. I went with the 5U4 in the 90s Fender Bassman LTD reissue, like Mr. E Train says. I love that Mr. E Train, Mystery Train, train. Yeah, I did that too because the B plus was way higher in the reissue than it was in the original, and there it was. The sound really got right. "16 coaches long." Let's see. Do I feel reactive loads like the Suhr, two notes, etc., can easily cause damage to tube amps? Well, a good quality thing like the Suhr or the two notes won't damage the amp. But what happens, though, is if I play an amp dimed for a long period of time and the amp's not 1,000% healthy, the amp can develop a problem. But because dimed amps are really loud, traditionally we don't play dimed amps a lot because it's too painful to be around. But with an attenuator, I can play a dimed amp and stand to be in the room, so I'm more likely to play a dimed amp for a long period of time, and that will reveal a problem the amp already had that I might not have ever discovered or would not have discovered for another 5 to 10 years if I hadn't been playing so loud so long. So don't think of a good attenuator as damaging an amp. Think of a good attenuator encouraging the conditions where a fault in an amp will reveal itself in an accelerated pace. That's separate from issues where a bad attenuator causes a fault in the output. Because that can happen at any level of attenuation if that attenuator loses a connection and then you don't have a load. But I would not worry about using a Suhr or other good quality attenuator or load box with a very nice amp. I would just say, hey, I would never do this on all the knobs on this 100-watt Marshall. Yeah, Van Halen might have. I think he lied about his settings on most of his interviews. But I don't have Van Halen money circa 1985. And I don't think you do either. I don't think people understand that he spent more on certain substances in the dressing room than we'll ever spend on amps. And he did that on a weekly basis. So he had a lot of money. He didn't have it at the end of it, but he had it at the time. So, that's enough about that. He was a really good player. I'm not denigrating the guy. It's just reality that a lot of myths put into all the guitar player and guitar world reviews and articles and interviews over the years, and gives players a sense that they need to dime everything to get a great sound. Mike L. almost missed this. No question marks in front of it. Is it possible or worth the time to change the optical tremolo circuit with a bias modulated trem on a twin reverb reissue? Yeah, you can. I wouldn't. It's possible. Yes. I don't think it's worth it because when you get into a bias trim with that much bias output level, it's going to be really hard to keep it from going boom, 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 boom. It's doable, but I don't think it's a desired goal. Especially since you get the sound of that for so many great digital pedals these days. Plug it into the amp, and there you go. Have your bias trim sound. Hey, old guy. The bath restoration, I had planned on last Tuesday doing this. I'm going to do it this Tuesday since tomorrow is Easter. I got to go do family stuff. I'm going to hang some plastic sheeting over the window and the door, and I'm going to put some buckets upside down over the stub outs for the bath drain and the tub drain, and I'm going to go up in the attic, and with a shop vac I'm going to get all the old insulation out of there, and then with a hammer and or my foot I'm going to kick through the old plaster and lath ceiling and knock it all down. And then once I get all that down, then I'll let all the dust settle. Then I'll go in there with a wheelbarrow, get all that stuff out of there and clean the hell out of it. And then I'm going to put in a new vent fan up top and run the wiring for some 4-inch LED dimmable lights in the ceiling. Then put in ceiling insulation, and then it's going to be time to drywall. So new ceiling and walls at the same time. It was supposed to be last Tuesday, but we had a thing happen to throw this whole week off. Thank you, Mike. I'll appreciate that. It is amazing that we can have people from all over the world pretty much in real time. Like, you guys are all in the same time together, and I'm only 8 seconds ahead of you. Of course, we got people from here from Australia. They're a day ahead of me. So, what's the best band I've seen live? This answer is going to tell you how weird my musical tastes are. Billy Joel's band for pure professionalism. Rush for being professional while trying harder. REM for being the most zeitgeist at the peak of the zeitgeist. This was on the Green tour. Or was it? It was Green, or yeah, it was Green. I saw them a couple times, but Green was the peak of that, the Document Green era. And then Elvis Costello at the high tone, Elvis Costello and the Impressions, and the Imposters, sorry, in a very small club. And that was just the most rock and roll, authentic, strip everything away. This is how you do it. Absolutely. And I've seen a lot of great bands, but that was just... And Stevie Ray Vaughan was just, I don't consider the Stevie Ray Vaughan band to be a world-class band. They did what he wanted them to do. But he was phenomenal. But in terms of a band performance... All right, let's see. We got 5 minutes left. I'm going to try to speed through the rest. Yeah, Mr. E-Train agrees with me for the bias trim sound on the Fender, the Origin, the Starman Flint. There are a lot of things. I probably think the Origin probably would beat the Flint. The Flint's about 10 years old now. So if I skip anyone, I apologize. Trying to catch any remaining super chats. Just got a Nader amp. Self-split paraphase. Is that what? Nope. Okay. I don't know. What are you saying by self-split PP? I would have to see the schematic to give you any kind of information. I'm not quite sure what your abbreviation means there. Self-split PP, no PI. Self-split push-pull? I'd have to see the schematic or the amp itself to tell you. Sounds interesting. I'll look for it, but I can't tell you about the topology without knowing how well that topology was implemented. Like there are paraphases which sound good, and the paraphases which sound terrible. There are long tail pairs, cathodines that sound fantastic, and pathodines sound horrible. So I'd have to see the nadir schematic. Sorry. I especially feel bad since you did a super chat, and my answer is I don't know, but I can't lie about it. Dead Amnesia. I've had really bad luck with most TAD branded. Caps. Okay, the tubes. No, the TAD caps are fine. Brad uses those all the time. The caps are fine. Let's see. More details on the nadir. Okay, cool. All right. I'd have to look and see how they did that. I don't know, Bryson. I'd have to see the schematic with the self split. That I'd really have to see that. It's just Ryan. I'm glad we agree. And I don't include all Rush concerts. I love Rush and I love the guys, but towards the end, age is a hell of a thing, and they played better at their oldest than I ever will. But I'm comparing them to themselves. So when they're they weren't as good in their 60s as they were in their 30s and 40s, and I think they tell you that. But I mean, they were probably wiser and probably enjoying it more, or slowing down enough to enjoy it. But seeing them 85 or 84 was a different experience. Hey, Jim Cavasoy. I measure the DC resistance from output transformer center tap to primary. Then I measure the voltage drop across that, and I know what the plate voltage is, and I can do the calculations from there. That's how I do it. I don't put it on the internet because it's a dangerous way to do it, and I don't want to have someone copy me or thinking that they know all the all the variables, but it's a dangerous way to do it. But that's how I do it. That way I know exactly what the plate voltage is. I don't have to worry about what's the screen or anything, and I know exactly what's happening per tube without installing any cathode resistors, etc. Well, Kevin, I appreciate that. I am really backlogged right now, and I cannot tell you when I'll be available to take another one. The best bet, if you really want me to do it, keep emailing me, and when I get basically, I'm like, okay, I'm got all but 5 out now. Let me look at the emails, see what the next batch is. And then I admit I cherry pick, not for easy things, but things that'll be interesting. Like if I've just done a Princeton and 3 deluxe reverbs, I don't want to do another Princeton and deluxe reverb for a little bit. I like to move around. Hey, yike, it's me. 72 blue line or black line. I always forget which one is which. SVT is hopping issues, which gradually lessen but still happen as amp warms up. Caps were replaced. That era of SVT has a board inside with a whole bunch of big resistors and a very flimsy single-sided board, and those resistors get hot, and that board often needs to be reflowed. Gets a lot of heat damage. The diodes get damaged. The large cement resistors need to be replaced. That's where I'd look, as well as on the output board, to make sure they have various things. Sometimes they have plate resistors, sometimes they have diodes. Even if all the components are good, the solder joints tend to get really, really untrustworthy on all MPEGs, especially that era of SVT. Especially if they're lessing as amp warms up, that would indicate that's probably just go through and reflow everything on every board is the way to go. And make sure you don't have any charring or toasting. Thank you, Richard. I appreciate that. Mike L., Taylor Swift's band is fantastic. When you're playing at that level and you cannot have mistakes, and everything's going to be like clockwork, you have the guys who can do all that stuff in one take. Like I went to the Nashville. We're going to run a little bit over today. If that's okay with everyone. I went to the Nashville Drummers Show 10 years or a little bit less ago. Before COVID, they were doing a tribute to Alex Van Halen. And so my buddy Chris Nix was Eddie for the night, and he did like 20 of songs of their catalog, but they had guest guitarists come to do spots. They had different drummers for almost everything because it's about Alex, but occasionally different guitarists would go up there and do Eddie. And one of the guys was from Taylor Swift's band, and he had his Frankenstrat. He had the thing. And he did one of the songs. I don't remember what song he did, but he played it perfectly. Even if the gig is Taylor Swift, which a lot of us might look down on for whatever reasons, the talent that gets you that gig, he could have been in all these other bands. Everyone go, ooh, look at that. But he went for stability and the ability to pay his mortgage and put his kids through school. Phenomenal players in those bands. And I have a lot of respect for Taylor Swift. I think she's a very accomplished songwriter, and I think she has, had her finger on the pulse of what that generation has wanted for the last 15 years. It'd be interesting to see how long she can keep it going. But I like the fact that she actually does write and produce her own stuff, even though she's worked with other writers, she's worked with other producers. She could sit down with a guitar in a hotel room and write a song, and you go, oh, damn, she's got it. Let's see. I don't know if a death cap famously killed anyone notable, but I would not be surprised if that were involved with Steve Marriott. I would be surprised if that were not involved with Steve Marriott, rather. I like Gaga, too. Lady Gaga is extraordinarily talented. I think, as a musician, Gaga is the real deal. For those of you who don't know, she went to piano conservatory. Perfect pitch. It's a shame about that Shallow song. I hate that song. But, she could have been a serious musician, but she decided she didn't want to be a serious, starving musician, so she reinvented herself. But, yeah. Anyway, I guess we're at the end of the second hour, third hour, rather, and I don't think we need to have another 50-year-old man explaining pop music to people. When did that happen? I used to be current. Anyway. Anyway, I thought Steve Marriott, was it Steve Marriott, the one who was electrocuted on stage? Well, one of the guys from that generation was electrocuted on stage. I thought it was Steve Marriott. I don't remember now. Anyway, see, I don't even remember the current stuff. I don't even remember the old stuff. I don't know what I'm doing these days. All right, being alive is current enough. With that hopeful thought, we will sign off. Everyone give a like before you go if you don't mind. It really does make this thing, it tells YouTube that this thing is worth watching and makes other people, it gets it recommended to other people. And if you guys like my videos, like, subscribe. You guys all subscribe. I appreciate that. Everyone who's here in the live stream subscribes. But, feel free to share with your friends. Hey, man, I saw this, you've been asking about twin reverbs. Check out this video. That kind of stuff really helps. We can, dare I say it, take over the world.